She laughed at him in front of everyone. Standing on that tarmac in her designer heels and her new husband's money. Claire Whitmore pointed at Daniel Mercer, the man she'd left, the man she'd called a failure, and she laughed. Still fixing other people's planes? Daniel. What she didn't know, what nobody in that crowd knew, was that the plane she was about to board, the $38 million aircraft her new husband was using to close the biggest deal of his career, Daniel owned it. Every bolt, every wire, every square inch. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if nobody's told you today, subscribe, because this one's going to stay with you. The morning it all began. Daniel Mercer was on his back underneath a 1987 Ford pickup truck that had no business still being on the road. He wasn't cursing the rust. He wasn't complaining about the oil that had just dripped onto his forehead. He was humming some old Tom Petty song, half-remembered, mostly improvised, the way a man hums when he's exactly where he expects to be, and has made a kind of private peace with it. His daughter Sophia appeared at the garage door in her school uniform backpack slung over one shoulder, a piece of toast hanging from her mouth. Dad. Dad, the bell's in 40 minutes. I know, Soph. You're covered in oil. I'm aware. You were supposed to be ready 20 minutes ago. He rolled out from under the truck on his creeper board, a flat wooden sled he'd built himself when Sophia was 9, because the hardware store ones kept breaking, and looked up at her from the floor of the garage. His face had a long smear of black grease across the left cheek. His hair was pushed flat on one side from the ground. He was grinning. Sophia stared at him. She was 16, and at 16, a father who grins from the garage floor covered in oil is approximately the most embarrassing thing the universe has produced. You're hopeless, she said, but she was trying not to smile. Hand me that rag. She tossed it. He wiped his face, which mostly just moved the grease around, and sat up. The carburetor float was stuck, he said. Like that explained everything. I don't know what that means. It means the truck'll start now. It barely started before. That was the whole problem. He stood stretched and looked at her. Really looked the way fathers do when they're cataloging a kid without wanting to get caught. The uniform was clean. The shoes were tied. She had her mother's cheekbones and her grandfather's eyes, and an expression of patient exasperation that was entirely her own. You eat toast. That's not eating. Dad. 2 minutes. He was already heading for the side door of the house. Jacket's on the hook. Grab it. Weather's changing. It's 60 degrees. It was 60 degrees. Now it's 53 and dropping. Jacket. She grabbed the jacket. The drive to Jefferson High took 11 minutes on a good day. 14 if they hit the light on Creston Avenue, and 17. If Daniel stopped for coffee at the Sunoco on the corner, which he did most mornings, because the Sunoco had a machine that made the kind of terrible, burnt, utterly reliable coffee that he'd come to depend on the way some men depend on ritual. He handed Sophia a granola bar from the glove compartment. This has been in there since last week, she said. It's sealed. That's not... She opened it. She ate it. You really need to get a new car, Dad. This car runs fine. It makes a sound when you turn left. That's just the CV joint. It's not dangerous, it's just embarrassing. He glanced at her. I was going to say communicative. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, the kind she tried to suppress when she thought he was being ridiculous, but couldn't quite manage. It filled the cab of the truck like something warm. I didn't say anything. He just drove, and the truck made its sound turning left onto Creston, and the light was green. And he didn't stop for coffee that morning, because he was already running late. But he filed the sound of that laugh away somewhere careful. The way you file something you might need later. The house they lived in was on Birchmore Lane, in a neighborhood that the city's real estate listings would call established, and anyone honest would call tired. The lawns were small. The gutters needed cleaning on half the block. 3 houses down, a retired postal worker named Glenn had been restoring a 1969 Camaro for 6 years and showed no sign of finishing. It was the kind of street where people nodded at each other in the mornings and minded their business in the evenings. And Daniel Mercer had lived there for 4 years, which was long enough that the neighbors knew him as the mechanic, or sometimes the pilot guy, because occasionally a car would pull up that looked out of place. Men in suits would go inside and people would wonder. But mostly, they just knew him as the single dad who kept to himself and kept the yard neat and never complained when Mrs. Okafor's terrier got loose and dug up his flower bed. He'd planted that flower bed for Sophia. She liked marigolds. He didn't particularly, but she did, and that was enough. His name was Daniel Mercer, and he was 38 years old, and if you passed him on the street, you would see medium height, lean, the kind of weathered that comes from working with your hands and spending time outdoors. Brown hair going a little gray at the temples. Eyes that were quiet and watchful in the way that either means a man is hiding something or simply doesn't feel the need to announce himself. In Daniel's case, it was both. He had a master's degree in aerospace engineering from Georgia Tech. He had a pilot's license, a commercial certification, and 2 additional ratings that most people in aviation had never heard of. He had in the spare room he'd converted to an office and kept locked when Sophia had friends over 4 filing cabinets full of patent applications, licensing agreements, and financial statements from a company called Meridian Aerotech LLC. Meridian Aerotech was not a large company by headcount. It had 11 full-time employees, all of them working out of a facility 40 miles east of the city, and a director of operations named Ethan Cole, who had been Daniel's college roommate and closest friend for the better part of 20 years. What Meridian Aerotech was one of the most quietly valuable aerospace technology companies in the private sector. Its flagship product, a fuel efficiency and real-time structural monitoring system called the Meridian Skyguard, had been licensed to 7 commercial carriers and 3 private aviation companies. It had, according to the most recent independent safety audit, prevented an estimated 4 catastrophic mechanical failures since its commercial deployment 18 months prior. The company's most recent private valuation, prepared for a prospective investor who had ultimately declined at the last moment before Daniel simply declined to sell, was $2.3 billion. Daniel Mercer's net worth on paper was somewhere north of $800 million. He drove a truck that made a sound when he turned left because the truck ran fine and he knew how to fix it, and that was what mattered to him. He had never told Claire any of this. The divorce had been 2 years ago. 14 months of marriage, 8 months of separation, and then a Tuesday morning in a mediator's office that Daniel remembered less clearly than he'd expected to, which he'd later decided was his mind's way of protecting him. Claire had been kind about it in the way that people are kind when they've already made their decision, and the kindness is meant to make themselves feel better, not you. "I love you, Daniel," she'd said. "I do, but I need more than love, and I think somewhere you know that." What she'd meant, what she'd never quite said out loud, but what had been understood between them, like weather, like a pressure system building for months, was that she needed more money, more status, more of the evidence of success, the visible kind, the kind you can show people at parties. She'd met Victor Langford 4 months after the separation, or so she'd claimed. Victor Langford was 45, silver-haired, the kind of tan that implied regular vacations and not yard work. He was the CEO of Langford Aviation Group, a mid-sized regional aviation company that chartered flights to business clients and operated a fleet of corporate jets. He had a house in Scottsdale. He had a box at the stadium. He had all the things that Daniel didn't have or appeared not to have displayed and polished and available for inspection. Claire had married him 9 months after the divorce was final. Daniel had found out from Sophie, who'd texted him a single message. "Mom got married Saturday. Are you okay?" He'd texted back, "Absolutely. You okay?" She'd sent a shrug emoji, which he'd interpreted correctly to mean not entirely, but I'm managing. He'd left it at that. He didn't push. He'd learned in the year since the separation that Sophia needed space to process things on her own terms, and that the best thing he could do was make sure the ground beneath her was solid. That home with him felt reliable, predictable, safe, while she figured out where everything else stood. He had not cried about the remarriage. He wasn't sure what that said about him. Ethan Cole had called him the morning after Sophia's text. Ethan did that, showed up at the edges of significant moments, the way a good friend does not intrusively just present. He'd been there when Daniel's father died. He'd been there the day Sophia was born. He'd been there when Daniel signed the papers to formalize Meridian Aerotech as a company, drinking bad bourbon in Daniel's kitchen at midnight, and saying with absolute sincerity, "You know this is going to change everything, right?" Daniel had said, "That's the plan." On the morning after Claire's remarriage, Ethan called and said, "You hear? Sophia told me. You okay?" "I'm fine." A beat. "You sure?" Ethan. "Right. Yeah. Okay." Another beat. "For what it's worth, my sources say Victor Langford has the emotional depth of a parking garage." Daniel had laughed, the kind that's surprised out of you. "Where do you find your sources?" "I'm well networked." Ethan's voice shifted, less comedy, more something honest underneath. "She made her choice, man. You didn't make her make it." "I know. You're not going to sit around feeling like you did?" "No." "Good. Because the Skyguard version 2 specs are on my desk, and I need your brain on them by Thursday. I'll be there Wednesday. Take the week. Sophia's fine. I'll be there Wednesday." And he had been. The Skyguard system had been Daniel's obsession for the better part of 8 years, which meant it had been his obsession during the marriage, which was part of why the marriage had frayed. Not the only part, but a part. The original concept came from an incident he'd witnessed as a young engineer, fresh out of Georgia Tech, working his first real job at a small MRO maintenance repair and overhaul facility attached to a regional airport. A corporate turboprop had come in for routine service. One of the senior mechanics had signed off on a hydraulic system check without fully completing it, not out of malice, just fatigue, the grinding everyday fatigue of a man working his third consecutive 12-hour shift. The plane had departed. 40 minutes later, it had declared an emergency and made a gear-up landing on a dirt strip, and everyone had walked away but barely. And Daniel had stood in the hangar afterward thinking, this system is broken. The system for catching this is broken. He'd spent the next 3 years thinking about what a better system would look like. The next 2 years building the prototype. The next 3 years refining it, patenting it, licensing it, watching it, fail 4 times and succeed once, and then slowly, then all at once, watching it become something real. He'd built it in garages, in spare rooms, in borrowed hangar space at small airports where he'd traded his labor for access to equipment. He'd funded it with consulting work and 2 small grants, and for a period of approximately 14 months that he almost never talked about with money. He'd earned flying charters in bad weather to small airports in the South, the kind of flying that paid well because nobody else wanted to do it. He'd done all of this while being in the visible surface of his life, a man who worked in a shop and drove an old truck and lived in a small house and seemed from the outside like someone who hadn't quite gotten there yet. He hadn't told Claire because he hadn't wanted to, not out of cruelty, not out of strategy. He simply had a deep, stubborn, fundamental belief forged in the same place everything stubborn is forged, which is lost, that the people who mattered should be with him because of him. Because of who he was in the room, in the truck, in the garage at midnight with grease on his face. Not because of what he'd built in the dark. He'd hoped Claire was one of those people. She wasn't. I didn't blame her for it exactly. People want what they want. You can't shame someone for their hunger. But he also hadn't been able to pretend it didn't mean something about the nature of what they'd had. So he'd let her go. And he'd kept building. On a Thursday morning in October, 6 weeks before the day that would change everything, Daniel was at the Meridian facility when Ethan walked in holding a printout and wearing the expression he wore when something was either very good or very complicated. Usually both. "You're going to want to see this," Ethan said. He put the printout on Daniel's desk. It was a contract proposal, a charter agreement for a Meridian-owned Gulfstream G550 that the company leased through a subsidiary. The lessee was listed as Langford Aviation Group. Daniel looked at it for a moment. "When did this come in?" "Yesterday. Through the standard channel they reached out to the subsidiary, not to us directly. They don't know who owns the asset." "And you're bringing it to me because Victor Langford is the CEO of Langford Aviation Group," Ethan said carefully. And because I thought you should know before I either approve or decline it. Daniel looked at the contract a moment longer. The lease was for a single charter flight, a premium round trip to a meeting with an investment consortium in Seattle. The kind of flight someone would book when they wanted to make a very particular impression. A $38 million aircraft, for a man who wanted people to think he had $38 million aircraft. Approve it, Daniel said. Ethan blinked. You sure? It's a legitimate charter. He's paying market rate. Approve it. Daniel. Ethan. Approve the contract. Ethan picked up the printout. He looked at it. He looked at Daniel. He had the expression of a man who has known someone long enough to know when they're making a decision from a complicated place, and also knows better than to say so. All right, he said. Done. He left the office. Daniel turned back to his screen. He didn't think about Victor Langford for the rest of the afternoon. Or so he told himself. Sophia was working on a history paper when he got home that evening. She'd spread her materials across the kitchen table, which she always did, because the kitchen table had the best light, and also because she'd been doing homework at that table since she was 6, and it was where her brain apparently decided to cooperate. Daniel put a pot of chili on the stove he'd made the base 2 days before, and poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, and watched her work without saying anything. After a while she said without looking up, "How was the facility?" "Good. Productive." "Ethan?" "Fine. Says hi." She looked up then. She had a pencil behind her ear and a smudge of something ink graphite on her wrist. "Dad." "Yeah." "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you stand there and think at me and wait for me to notice something's wrong." He smiled a little. "That obvious. I've been living with you my whole life." She put her pencil down. What happened? He considered it. He could tell her a version of it anyway. He could say, "I found out today that your stepfather is chartering a plane I own, and I don't know exactly what I feel about that." But that would put her in the middle of something, and she didn't belong in the middle of it. "Nothing happened," he said. "Long day. Good chili though if you're hungry." She studied him for a moment with those eyes. Her grandfather's eyes. That same quality of seeing through things you'd rather they didn't see, and then she picked up her pencil. "Okay," she said. He knew she didn't entirely believe him. He also knew she was letting it go, because she understood in the way that children of single parents sometimes understand things that are genuinely adult, that he had a right to his private thoughts. He loved her for that. He loved her for a lot of things, but especially for that. 2 weeks later, Ethan called at 6:40 in the morning. Daniel was already awake. He was almost always already awake at 6:40, and he was sitting with his coffee at the kitchen table, going through the SkyGuard version 2 test data on his laptop while the house was still quiet. "We have a problem," Ethan said. No preamble. Ethan only skipped preamble when things were serious. "What kind?" "The G550, the Langford charter. Pre-flight inspection flagged something Marcos found it this morning." Marcos was their lead maintenance technician, 20-year Navy avionics background, the most careful man Daniel had ever worked with. If Marcos flagged something, you listened. Hydraulic actuator in the primary flight control system. It's showing fatigue indicators on the sensor log that shouldn't be there. The numbers aren't catastrophic yet, but they're trending wrong. Daniel set down his coffee. "How wrong?" "Wrong enough that Marcos won't sign the airworthiness release. He says it's his call and he's not comfortable." "It's his call and he's right." The flight's scheduled for departure at 11. Langford's people called the subsidiary office at 6 this morning asking for confirmation. When they didn't get it immediately, they escalated. A pause. "They're pushing hard, Daniel. Apparently this investor meeting is—" "I don't care what the investor meeting is." "I know you don't. I just want you to understand what we're walking into." "Who's going to the airport?" "Marcos is already there. I'm heading out now." Another pause, shorter. "Daniel, you don't have to come." He was already closing the laptop. "I'll meet you there." He wore his old jacket. The gray one with the Meridian logo on the chest, small, inconspicuous, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you knew what to look for. He'd grabbed it automatically, the same jacket he'd worn to 100 hangar inspections, and hadn't thought about it. He thought about it later. He would think about it a great deal. The airport was a private general aviation facility, 22 miles from downtown. The kind of place that served corporate charters, wealthy private owners, and the occasional film production renting a jet for background footage. The runway was immaculate. The terminal was modest but well-appointed, designed to suggest discretion and competence rather than ostentation. Daniel parked in the secondary lot and walked across the tarmac with his hands in his jacket pockets and saw the G550 immediately. It was a beautiful aircraft. He knew every specification of it. He had, after all, acquired it 2 years prior at a fleet auction and had it refitted with the latest avionics and a custom interior that had taken 4 months and significant expense. It sat on the apron like something patient and precise. Marcos was underneath the left wing, running cables from a diagnostic unit. He was a broad-shouldered man of 53 who spoke sparingly and always about things that mattered. He looked up when Daniel approached. "Actuators worse than the initial read," Marcos said. "I've got the full sensor dump now. The fatigue signature's consistent with a manufacturing defect in the batch. I flagged this same signature on a 550 in Tucson 14 months ago. That plane was grounded. This one slipped through because the pre-lease inspection was done by a contractor and they didn't have the updated parameter set. Our fault, or the contractor's. Contractually theirs, operationally." Marcos made a face that contained a full paragraph of professional opinion. "We should have had our own checklist run. We didn't because the subsidiary uses the contractor for routine pre-flight, and nobody pulled the updated parameters after the Tucson advisory. That changes." "Yes, sir." "What's the status right now?" "Grounded. I will not release this aircraft until the actuator is replaced and re-inspected. That's minimum 12 hours, probably closer to 16. Daniel nodded. "Schedule it." "Already did." Marcos paused. "There are some people inside. They're not happy." "There never are." He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the terminal. He heard her voice before he saw her. He'd know Claire's voice in a room full of noise, not because of sentiment exactly, but because the brain does that with people it's spent significant time with. It catalogs them, files them somewhere automatic. She was standing near the entrance to the boarding lounge, talking to a man Daniel didn't recognize, mid-40s, charcoal suit, the alert, contained expression of someone who manages logistics for people with money. Her own suit was the color of deep water, fitted precisely, and she wore her hair the way she always had when she wanted to project command. She looked good. That was simply true. She'd always looked good. She hadn't seen him yet. And then she turned, and she did. There was a fraction of a second. Daniel was sure of this. He was watching carefully where something genuine crossed her face. Something that wasn't performance. He didn't know what to call it. He filed it away. Then the performance resumed. "Daniel." Her voice had that quality. It sometimes got lightly amused, lightly incredulous, as if the universe had decided to play a small and slightly ridiculous joke. "What are you doing here?" "Pre-flight issue," he said. "One of the aircraft systems needs attention." "You're—" She stopped, looked him up and down, the old jacket, the worn boots, the tarmac. "You're working here as a mechanic." "I'm here about the aircraft," he said evenly. There was movement behind her. Victor Langford had emerged from the boarding lounge, a tall man, the kind of silver-haired handsome that photographs, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's truck. He moved with the specific confidence of a man who has learned that arriving slowly implies importance. He looked at Daniel with the immediate, practiced appraisal of someone who sorts people into categories quickly and permanently. "Who's this?" he asked Claire, not looking at Daniel when he said it. "This is Daniel," she said. There was a very slight something in how she said it. "My ex-husband." Victor looked at Daniel properly then. A full second of assessment. Then, apparently satisfied with his conclusions, he said, "Mechanics are supposed to use the service entrance." Daniel said nothing. "Victor," Claire started. "The flight's at 11. Victor said it to the air between them, with the tone of a man accustomed to problems resolving themselves when he expressed impatience with them. "Is there a problem with the aircraft?" The aircraft is grounded, Daniel said. Silence. Victor looked at him. I'm sorry. The primary flight control hydraulic actuator is showing fatigue indicators inconsistent with safe operation. The aircraft is grounded pending replacement and re-inspection. Earliest available release is approximately 16 hours. Another silence, this one with a different temperature. That is not acceptable, Victor said. I have a meeting in Seattle at 3 o'clock this afternoon. This meeting. He stopped, apparently deciding not to explain the meeting to a mechanic. Who authorized this grounding? Our maintenance chief. His authorization is final on airworthiness. Then I want to speak to someone with authority over your maintenance chief. Daniel looked at him calmly. That would be me. Victor's expression didn't change much, but something behind it shifted. You're the supervisor. Something like that. Then unground the aircraft. There was a moment. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds and felt longer. No, Daniel said. He said it quietly. He said it without heat. He said it the way you say something that is simply true and requires no amplification. Victor stared at him. It was the stare of a man who was genuinely uncertain whether he was being defied or whether there was some miscommunication that needed correcting. I beg your pardon. The aircraft is not safe for flight. I won't release it. That decision doesn't change because the schedule is inconvenient. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. I have a contractual. Your contract guarantees you an airworthy aircraft. This aircraft is not currently airworthy. We're making it airworthy as quickly as we can. That's what the contract guarantees. It does not guarantee that we will fly you somewhere in an unsafe aircraft because you have a meeting. A beat. Do you have any idea, Victor said with a kind of cold, deliberate precision, what this meeting is worth? Doesn't matter to me, Daniel said. That was when Claire laughed. Not a big laugh, controlled, a little sharp. The laugh of someone releasing something they'd been holding. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her in a long time. Something that had complicated layers, and on top of those layers was the performed amusement. Daniel, she said, you're still doing this. You're still the guy who has to be right about every little thing, even when being right costs everyone around you. She gestured at the aircraft at the tarmac at the general situation. This is someone else's airplane. These are someone else's problems. You don't get to make this call. He looked at her. This is my call, he said, simply, flatly. And I'm making it. She shook her head. That old gesture, the one that meant, this is exactly what I always meant. You see what I mean? This is the problem. You know what's sad, she said, and her voice had shifted into something quieter, more personal, the kind of thing you'd say in a private conversation, except that there were 4 other people within earshot, and she'd decided apparently that this moment was going to be had publicly. I used to think you'd figure it out eventually. I really did. But you're still exactly where you were 3 years ago, standing next to someone else's plane in your old jacket making decisions that aren't yours to make. He let her finish. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He held her gaze with the patience of a man who has nothing to prove and knows it, and waited until she was done. Then he said very quietly, "The aircraft stays grounded." He turned back toward the tarmac, and that was when he heard the cars. 3 black vehicles, 2 SUVs and a town car, had turned through the airfield gate and were moving along the service road toward the apron. They pulled up in a precise line. The town car stopped closest. Ethan Cole got out. He was dressed the way he always dressed for formal occasions. Dark suit, no tie, the contained authority of all man who doesn't need the tie to communicate that he's in charge. He was 42 years old and had the specific bearing of someone who has been solving serious problems for a long time and has stopped finding them stressful. He walked directly to Daniel. "Mercer," he said. Old habit, they'd called each other by last name since freshman year of college and hadn't stopped. "Marcos briefed me. Actuators ordered crews on it. Should have the replacement in by end of day." "Good." Daniel nodded. "Make sure the pre-flight on completion runs our parameters, not the contractors. Already in the updated protocol." Ethan glanced sideways at Victor, at Claire, at the general scene. He took it in with the efficiency of a man who processes rooms quickly. "Everything all right out here?" "The client is disappointed about the delay," Daniel said. Ethan looked at Victor directly. "We understand, and we apologize for the inconvenience. We'll have an alternative aircraft available if you need to make your meeting. We have a Citation X available at the regional facility 40 minutes from here. Smaller, but she'll get you to Seattle with time to spare." Victor stared at him. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole, Director of Operations." A pause precise as a scalpel. "Meridian Aerotech." Silence. Victor looked from Ethan to Daniel, back to Ethan. Something was recalculating. "Meridian Aerotech," he said slowly. "That's the subsidiary, the charter company." "The subsidiary, yes." Ethan's voice was entirely neutral. "Among other things." Victor looked at Daniel again. "You work for Meridian Aerotech." Daniel held his gaze. He said nothing. He didn't need to, because Ethan said with the quiet delivery of someone who is not making a dramatic announcement, but simply correcting a factual misunderstanding. "Mr. Langford Daniel doesn't work for Meridian Aerotech." A beat. "He is Meridian Aerotech." The apron was very quiet. Claire's face did something complicated and private, and then went still. Victor looked at Daniel for a long moment. A different kind of look than before. Recalibrated, running new calculations, and said, "You're the principal." "I'm the founder," Daniel said. "The aircraft is mine." "Yes." Another silence. Longer. "The Skyguard system," Victor said, and something had shifted in his voice, a recognition, the particular sound of a man who has just placed a piece of information he's encountered before. "The fuel efficiency system. The monitoring." "Yes." Victor looked at him. He looked at the G550 on the apron. He looked at the Meridian logo small on the tail, the same logo that was on Daniel's jacket, the one nobody had apparently looked at closely enough. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I need to make a call." He walked away, phone to his ear, and the man in the charcoal suit followed him, which left Claire. She was standing very still. The expression she wore was one he'd only seen a few times in the years they'd known each other, stripped of the performance, the competence, the forward momentum she'd always used as armor. She was looking at him the way you look at something when you suddenly understand it differently and can't unknow the new understanding. "Daniel," she said. He waited. "This is—" She stopped. "Meridian Aerotech. That's another stop." He could see her assembling it. The facility he sometimes mentioned without detail. The late nights. The trips. Ethan's calls. The locked room in the house she assumed was a home office for his engineering consulting work. "You built this?" "Yes." "When?" "A long time ago." He paused. "It was always there, Claire. It just wasn't visible." She absorbed that. He could see her absorbing it. "Why didn't you—" She stopped again, this time for longer. When she spoke, her voice had lost its edge. "Why didn't you tell me—" It was a genuine question. He could hear that. Underneath the shock and the recalculation and whatever else was moving through her, he could hear a real question. He thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because I needed to know," he said, "that you'd stay with me without knowing." A long quiet. The wind moved across the apron. Somewhere in the hangar a tool clattered. Claire said nothing. He said nothing. He had nothing more to say. He turned toward Marcos and the work that needed doing, and behind him the morning light fell clean and straight across the tarmac, and the G550 sat patient and grounded and safe, waiting to fly when it was ready. The way some things do. The silence on that tarmac lasted maybe 10 seconds. To Daniel, it felt like 10 minutes. He watched Claire's face. Really watched it the way you watch something when you know you won't see it again the same way, and he saw the moment the information finished landing. Not the first impact, which had been visible and immediate. The second one. The deeper one. The kind that doesn't make noise. She pressed her lips together and looked at the aircraft, and then back at him, and he understood that she was doing arithmetic, the painful retrospective kind that you can't stop once it starts. Every argument they'd had about money. Every time she'd looked at the house on Birchmore Lane with that particular expression, she'd thought he didn't notice. Every morning she'd watched him leave in the old truck and decided invisibly that this was evidence of something. He didn't feel vindicated. He'd been braced for vindication, and it hadn't arrived. What he felt instead was something quieter and harder to name. Something close to grief, maybe. The grief of understanding finally and completely that what you'd hoped was possible had never been possible at all. Ethan was talking to the man in the charcoal suit, walking him toward the side entrance of the terminal giving Daniel room. That was Ethan. He'd always known when to be present and when to clear space. Victor had disappeared around the far side of the building, still on his phone. From 30 yards away, Daniel could hear the controlled intensity of his voice, but not the words. Claire said his name again. Daniel. I heard you the first time. I'm not... She stopped. I'm not trying to... Another stop. He'd forgotten she did this, reached for words and pulled back, dissatisfied, tried again. He'd used to think it meant she was being careful. Later he'd understood it meant she was managing how she appeared. He wasn't sure anymore which of those readings was accurate. Maybe both. Maybe neither. I owe you an apology, she said. He looked at her. About what I said. Before. When I said you were still... She made a small gesture that encompassed the jacket, the tarmac, the whole earlier scene. That was unfair. You didn't have all the information, he said. People say things when they don't have all the information. That's very generous. It's just accurate. She studied him. That used to unsettle him, her looking at him steadily, with the assessment in her eyes that never quite went off duty. Now it just felt like weather. Something to stand in without necessarily minding. You're not angry, she said. No. Why not? He thought about that. He picked the honest answer over the comfortable one the way he generally did. Because being angry at you would mean I was still invested in what you thought of me, and I stopped being invested in that a while ago. He paused. That's not cruelty, it's just the truth. She absorbed it. Her jaw worked slightly, the tell she'd always had when something hit somewhere real. Right, she said. Okay. Then Victor came back. He walked faster than before, the composed efficiency replaced by something more purposeful, more tightly wound. He stopped 4 feet from Daniel, and he did not look at Claire. He was looking at Daniel, and the calculation in his eyes had been replaced by something less polished. I've just gotten off the phone with my attorney, Victor said. Daniel waited. I want to discuss the existing charter contract. Ethan handles contracts. I want to discuss it with you. A beat. All right. Privately. Daniel looked at Victor for a moment. Then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and walked toward the terminal entrance. Victor followed. Claire started to follow, and Victor said without turning, "Give us a moment." And she stopped. The terminal's back office was a small room with a desk and 2 chairs, and a whiteboard covered in aircraft schedules. It smelled like coffee and hydraulic fluid. Daniel sat in one of the chairs. Victor remained standing, which was fine. Daniel wasn't interested in power dynamics, but he recognized the choice for what it was. I've been in aviation for 20 years, Victor said. I know. A pause. You know about me. You chartered one of my aircraft. I know my clients. Victor was quiet a moment. Processing. The Skyguard system, he said. Langford Aviation's been in talks with your licensing team for the past 5 months. I'm aware. The terms your team offered are the terms, Daniel said. They don't vary based on the client. Victor looked at him. You've been in those negotiations this whole time. Indirectly. And you didn't? Victor stopped. Recalibrated. He was a man who had built a company who understood the mechanics of leverage, and he was now rearranging the room in his head, figuring out where the actual walls were. You approved this charter, knowing it was me. Yes. Why? Daniel looked at him evenly. Because it's a legitimate charter and you're paying market rate. My personal life doesn't enter into my business decisions. Victor studied him for a long moment. That's a very clean answer. It's the true one. Another silence. Victor put his hands in his pockets, a gesture Daniel recognized as the transition from offense to something more like negotiation posture. "The Seattle meeting," he said. "It's with the Harwick Group. You know who they are. Investment Consortium, private aviation focus. Yes. They're evaluating 3 carrier operations for a platform investment. I'm one of the 3. Victor paused. "My pitch is partly built on SkyGuard integration, as a differentiator." Daniel said nothing. "Which means," Victor continued, "that in a room I'm about to walk into, the technology I'm presenting as my competitive advantage is technology I license from the man whose ex-wife I married." He said it with a kind of flat directness that Daniel hadn't expected. Not self-pity, not accusation, just the fact laid out, acknowledged. "That's an uncomfortable position." "I imagine it is. I'd like to know where we stand." Daniel looked at him. "The licensing agreement your team is negotiating stands on its own terms. The charter contract stands on its own terms. This conversation," he gestured between them, "stands on its own terms. I don't mix them." You could," Victor said carefully, "use what you know about the negotiation, about today. I'm aware you're in a position to—" "I'm not going to do that," Daniel said. A pause. "Just like that. Just like that. Why?" And Daniel looked at him. At this man who had married his ex-wife and used his aircraft to impress investors, and was now standing in a small office trying to figure out the angle, and said without heat, without performance, "Because doing otherwise would make me the kind of person I don't want to be. And I've spent a long time building something I'm proud of. I'm not going to dirty it." Victor stared at him. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he said very quietly, "That must be a very good feeling." Daniel wasn't sure if it was contempt or something more honest. Maybe Victor wasn't sure either. "The Citation X at the regional facility is available," Daniel said. "If you want to make your meeting, Ethan can have it ready in 90 minutes. Victor straightened, adjusted his jacket. "Set it up," he said, and walked out. Daniel sat in the quiet office for a moment. Outside he could hear the hangar, the soft mechanical sounds of Marcos and his crew doing the work of making something safe that had been unsafe. The ordinary, necessary, unglamorous work, the kind that didn't photograph well. He stood up and went back out to the tarmac. Sophia called at noon. He was eating a sandwich in the hangar, bad bread, good turkey, the particular satisfaction of eating something functional while doing something useful, when his phone vibrated. "Dad, where are you? Work thing came up. What's up, Soph? I got an email." He heard the specific quality of her voice, the one that meant she was managing excitement by holding it very still, because at 16 she'd decided that visible excitement was a form of vulnerability. "From the Hartwell Foundation." He put the sandwich down. "And I made the final round." A pause. "For the Aviation Engineering Scholarship." The Hartwell Foundation Aviation Engineering Scholarship was, as Daniel knew without saying so, one of the most competitive secondary school grants in the country. Sophia had applied 4 months ago on her own initiative, had found it herself written. The application herself asked him only to proofread 1 paragraph, and even then had accepted only 2 of his 3 suggested changes, because the 3rd one, she'd said, made it sound less like her. "Sophia, it doesn't mean I got it. It's just the final round. There are 12 finalists." "Sophia, it's not. You made the final round of the Hartwell Scholarship." A pause. "Yeah. That's exceptional." "Dad, that's exceptional. Say it." He heard her resist it. He heard her give in to it. "Okay," she said. "It's pretty exceptional. It's very exceptional. You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you? Completely insufferable." He was smiling so hard his face hurt. "The final round interview, do you know when?" 3 weeks. They do it in person, Chicago. I'll make the arrangements. You don't have to. Sophia, I'm going to Chicago for this interview. End of discussion." He picked up his sandwich. "Eat something." "I've been at school since 7. It's noon. Eat something." He paused. "And congratulations, kid. I mean it." Another pause, shorter, softer. "Thanks, Dad." He hung up and sat with the phone in his hand and felt something that didn't have a precise name but was adjacent to joy. Not the complicated edged emotions of the morning. Those were still there, filed away, available for examination later when the day had less happening. This was simpler. His daughter had done something extraordinary in a field she'd chosen for her own reasons, and she'd done it through her own effort, and she'd called him first to tell him. He ate the rest of the sandwich. He went back to work. Ethan found him 2 hours later when the actuator replacement was underway and the crew had the situation in hand. "Victor Langford is on the citation," Ethan said. "Wheels up 20 minutes ago." "Good." He was polite, which was unexpected. People usually are when they understand the situation. Ethan gave him a look, the particular look that had been developed over 20 years of friendship and communicated without words, that Ethan knew exactly what was being said and also what wasn't being said. "Claire. She's gone." "Did you talk to her?" "A little." "And?" Daniel considered this question. He thought about the look on her face when Ethan had said, "He is Meridian Aerotech." He thought about the 10 seconds of silence on the tarmac. He thought about her saying, "I owe you an apology," and the way she'd said it, stripped of the usual armoring, the real voice coming through. "She was surprised," he said finally. "That's it. She was surprised. And sorry. She said she was sorry." "What did you say?" "That she didn't have all the information." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. He had the expression he got when he thought Daniel was being either noble or evasive, and wasn't sure which. "You know she's going to want to talk to you again, after today." "Probably." And I'll talk to her if she reaches out." Daniel looked at him. "It's not a thing, Ethan. It was a marriage that ended. Now it's a mourning that happened. I'm not going to build a narrative around it." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sophia call you?" "Yes." "Hartwell Finals." Daniel looked at him. "How did you—" "I wrote her a recommendation letter. Didn't mention it because she asked me not to." Ethan shrugged, aiming for casual and not quite reaching it. "She wrote me a formal email request. Referenced 3 specific metrics she thought made her a strong candidate, and acknowledged she'd understand if my schedule didn't permit. She's 16. I know. She's going to be terrifying when she grows up." "She already is." Ethan smiled, the full one, the real one that he didn't deploy in professional contexts. "Congratulations, Dad." "We haven't gotten the scholarship yet." "No," Ethan said. "But you raised the kind of kid who makes the Hartwell Finals on her own. That part's already done." He paused. "That part's on you." The G550 passed its inspection at 7:40 that evening. Marcos personally ran the verification sequence, all 4 hours of it, and then ran it again. When he was satisfied, he brought the documentation to Daniel and set it on the workbench without comment, which was Marcos's version of a ceremony. Daniel signed the airworthiness release. He drove home in the dark in the truck that made a sound when he turned left. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were visible in a way they weren't when there was weather, sharp and certain and very far away. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. The house was lit from inside kitchen light, the lamp in the living room that Sophia always left on when she was upstairs. The faint blue glow from her bedroom window that meant she was probably on her laptop. It looked warm. It looked exactly the way it always looked. He sat in the truck and thought about the day in a general, unfocused way, not analyzing it, just letting it move through him. The call at 6:40. Marcos on the tarmac. Victor's recalibrating eyes. Claire's face in the moment of understanding. And Sophia's voice. It's pretty exceptional. Yeah, he thought. It is. He went inside. At school the next morning, Sophia dropped something on the kitchen table before he'd fully processed that she was awake, a printed copy of an article. "What is this?" he said. "You should read it." He picked it up. It was a printout from an aviation industry newsletter. A brief item trade press. The kind of thing that circulated among people who paid attention to the sector. The headline was, "Meridian Aerotech CEO grounds Langford charter over safety concern, sources say." He read the 3 paragraphs. The story was accurate in its basics and wrong in its framing, which was how these things always went. It positioned the grounding as a dispute between Meridian and Langford Aviation. It mentioned the hydraulic actuator issue. It did not mention Claire. It did not mention Daniel specifically by name, referred to him only as company principal. "Where did you find this?" he said. "A girl in my physics class. Her dad works in aviation. She showed me on her phone and I recognized." Sophia stopped. "Dad, that's you. You grounded Victor's plane." He set the printout down. "The aircraft had a safety issue. It was grounded. Because you found a defect. Marcos found it. I concurred with his assessment." Sophia was looking at him with the look that meant she was deciding how to ask the next question. "Was Mom there?" He picked up his coffee. "Yes. Did she know it was your company?" "She does now." A silence. He could hear Sophia processing it, not noisily, just the quiet hum of someone running calculations. She was 16, and she was very, very good at running calculations. "Are you okay?" she said. "I'm fine, Soph." "Dad? I'm genuinely fine. It was a strange morning. Things came out into the open that had been kept in. That's not always a bad thing." She considered that. "What did she say, Mom?" He looked at his daughter. He thought about the truth, the unedited version with the laugh on the tarmac, and the 10 seconds of silence, and the question, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he thought about what Sophia needed from him, which was not every truth in its raw form, but the truth shaped carefully, the way you shape something that has to pass through a particular space. She was surprised, he said. And then she apologized. Sophia absorbed this. "Did you accept it?" It wasn't the kind of apology that needs accepting or rejecting. It was real, so I received it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "She used to talk about you like you were someone who'd given up." He looked at her. "Not directly to me," she said quickly. "I overheard things. Or she'd say things by implication the way adults do when they think kids aren't tracking." She looked at the printout. "I always knew that wasn't true." He set his coffee down. He crossed the kitchen, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and he held her for a moment. His tall, complicated, extraordinary daughter, who wrote formal recommendation letter requests at 16, and didn't let people see her excitement, and had always known him to be more than what was visible. "You've always had good instincts," he said. She leaned into him for 1 second. 1 real second, and then pulled back and picked up her backpack because she was 16, and the moment of tenderness had a limited window before it became embarrassing. "You're dropping me off," she said, "and your truck is going to make that noise on Creston again." "It always does." "It's so embarrassing." "It's communicative." "You're impossible," she said. But she was smiling, and he filed that away in the same place he filed everything that mattered. 3 days after the tarmac, his phone showed a number he recognized. Claire's number. He looked at it for the full length of the first ring. He'd known this would come. Ethan had said so, and Daniel had agreed privately, and he'd thought about what he wanted to say when it did. He'd reached the conclusion that he didn't need a plan. Plans were for conversations where you wanted to control the outcome. He didn't want to control this one. He answered. "Claire. Hi." A pause. "Is this a bad time?" "No." Another pause. He waited. He was good at waiting. "I've been thinking about what to say since Thursday," she said, "and I keep writing it and deleting it and starting over." A breath. "So I'm just going to say it plainly. Okay. I was wrong about who you were, about what you were building, about—" She stopped, and he heard her push through it. "About a lot of things. I made assumptions about what success looked like, and I let those assumptions override everything I actually knew about you as a person, and that was a failure of character on my part. Not just a mistake. A failure." He was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "Is that all? What else should I say? I don't know. I expected—" She stopped. "Actually, no. I know what I expected. I expected you to have some comeback. Some version of I told you so. Something. I never needed to tell you so, Claire. That was never the point." A long pause. What was the point? And he thought about it. Truly thought about it the way you think about questions that deserve real answers. The point, he said, was building something real, and raising Sophia to know what real looks like. The rest. He paused. The rest was always noise. She was quiet for what felt like a minute. She's lucky, she said finally. Sophia, to have you. She's worked hard to be who she is. I know, but she had someone showing her what hard work actually looks like. A pause. Not the version of it that announces itself, the other kind. He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been either false modesty or agreement, and both felt wrong. Victor and I are... She stopped. Things are complicated right now, with the investigation into the pitch documents. His attorney says it's... She cut herself off. You don't need to hear about that. Probably not, he agreed. I'm not calling because I'm in trouble, she said, and it came out quick like something she needed to say before he could think it. I'm not calling because things are difficult with Victor and I want... She stopped it again. I'm calling because I owed you the apology, not the quick one on the tarmac, a real one. You've given it, he said. Does it mean anything? I thought about that. Yes, he said. It means you're the person I thought you were somewhere underneath everything. It just means you took a long way around to showing it. She was quiet. Take care of yourself, Claire, he said. You too. And then very softly, tell Sophia I'm proud of her. About the scholarship. How did you... She texted me, Claire said. She tells me things. She's good about that. A pause, and something in her voice shifted something quieter and more private. She's very good about that. He said goodbye. He hung up. He sat with the phone for a moment and thought about Sophia texting her mother about the Hartwell scholarship. Thought about the complicated adult thing that was the way his daughter navigated the divided geography of her own life with more grace than most adults managed. Thought about what it meant that she'd told Claire and also called him first. Both things. Both true. Both real. He set the phone down and went back to the Skyguard version 2 specs because the work was there and it needed doing, and that was what he did. The investigation. Ethan's legal team had quietly initiated into Victor's investor pitch materials moved faster than any of them had expected. The core issue was straightforward. If damaging Victor's pitch deck presented to the Harwick Group and 2 prior investment consortiums over the preceding 8 months had incorporated detailed Skyguard performance data specifics about fuel efficiency improvements, safety incident prevention, records integration costs that had been provided to Langford Aviation Group under NDA during the licensing negotiations. The NDA was explicit. The data could not be used in investor-facing materials without written authorization from Meridian. Victor had used it, or someone on his team had, and whether that was with his full knowledge or not was the precise question that was now being examined. Daniel's attorney, a quiet woman named Rachel Osei, who billed $400 an hour and was worth every penny, called him on a Wednesday morning with the initial findings. The documentation trail is clear, she said. Whoever prepared that pitch deck pulled directly from the NDA-protected materials. We have version metadata date stamps, email traffic between Langford's strategy team and the deck designer. What are our options? Full range. We can pursue breach of NDA, which is civil but significant. There's a potential tortious interference angle, if we can demonstrate it affected the Harwick Group's investment decision. If Victor personally directed the use of the materials, knowing they were NDA protected, there may be further exposure. She paused. Or we can pursue a settlement, which, given the licensing negotiations still on the table, might actually serve our business interests better than a protracted litigation. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What does Victor know right now about where this investigation stands? His attorney contacted us yesterday. He knows we know. What did his attorney say? That they want to discuss resolution. Another pause. Which in translation means they want to know how bad this is going to get and whether they can pay their way out of it. He looked out the window at the yard at the Marigolds that were still just managing the tail end of the season at the old truck in the driveway. Rachel, he said, I want to settle, not because I'm feeling generous, because the licensing deal is actually good for our technology's reach, and a litigation war doesn't serve that. But I want two things. Tell me. Full compliance with the existing NDA terms going forward. And I want the licensing agreement renegotiated. The data Victor's team used in that pitch generated measurable investor interest. That has a value. I want it reflected in the terms. Rachel was quiet for a beat. That's a good position. Can we get it? Given what we have in documentation. Yes, I think we can. Get it, he said. He hung up. He thought about Victor standing in that back office, looking at him with something that might have been contempt or something more honest, saying that must be a very good feeling. Maybe it was, but not for the reason Victor had assumed. The Hartwell Foundation interview was on a Thursday afternoon, and Daniel drove Sophia to the regional airport himself. Not in the truck. He had, for the first time in 2 years, arranged to use one of the Meridian aircraft, a smaller Phenom 300, that he kept for operational purposes and almost never used personally. He'd told Sophia 2 days before, and she'd stared at him. "We're flying there," she'd said. "It's a 4-hour drive. The interview's at 2. We could leave early. Sophia, we're flying." She'd given him the 16-year-old expression that meant she was fighting a smile. "You own the plane," she'd said, "and you never use it." "I'm using it now. Because of the interview. Because it makes sense logistically." She'd looked at him for a long moment. "Dad," she'd said, "it's okay to do something for yourself once in a while. You know that, right?" He'd been quiet for a moment. Then, "Get your jacket." "It's not even cold." "Get your jacket." She'd gotten it. And now they were at the airport at 7 in the morning, the Phenom sitting on the apron in the early light, while the crew ran the pre-flight sequence, and Sophia was standing next to him with her backpack and her interview clothes in a garment bag, and her grandfather's eyes taking everything in. "Dad." "Yeah." "Tell me honestly." She was looking at the aircraft. "When did you know that it was going to work? That Meridian was going to be—" She gestured. "This." I thought about it. He thought about a night in a borrowed hangar space when he was 31 running the third iteration of the Skyguard prototype at 2 in the morning on borrowed equipment, and the moment the diagnostic readout had shown exactly what he'd predicted it would show, had validated 3 years of work in a single clean dataset. He'd sat on a folding chair in that hangar, and he'd cried briefly and privately, the way men cry when there's nobody watching, and something has finally confirmed what they'd been afraid to believe. "A long time ago," he said. "Before you could remember." She nodded slowly. "And you kept it quiet all that time?" "I had my reasons." "I know." She paused. "Mom was one of them." He looked at her. "Not the whole reason," she said, "but one of them." "Yeah," he said. "One of them." She was quiet for a moment. The crew chief came out and gave them the ready signal. "I know why you did it," she said. "The keeping it quiet. I think I've always known, actually." She picked up her garment bag. "You needed to know who people really were, when it didn't cost them anything to be real." He looked at his daughter. This extraordinary person, who had grown up in the divided geography of 2 households and 2 versions of her parents, and had somehow emerged from it with a clarity about human nature that most people took decades to develop. "When did you get so smart?" he said. She shrugged. "I had a good teacher," she said. She started toward the aircraft. "Don't get sentimental, it's early." "I'm not." "You're absolutely getting sentimental." "I'm fine." "You're a little teary." "That's the morning air." "Dad?" "Get on the plane, Sophia." She laughed that laugh again, the one that filled whatever space it was in, and went up the steps. He stood on the apron for a moment in the early light. He was maybe a little teary, he'd never admit it. He went up the steps and flew his daughter to her interview. The Hartwell Foundation's Chicago office was on the 14th floor of a glass building that Sophia described when they stepped off the elevator as aggressively serious. Daniel had laughed. She was right. The waiting room had the particular gravity of a place where consequential decisions were made, routinely quiet, precise, the kind of understated that costs more than the obvious kind. 4 other finalists were already seated when they arrived. Sophia clocked them the way she always clocked rooms quickly, without appearing to filing details. "Engineering kid from MIT Prep," she murmured to Daniel as they signed in. "Girl by the window's a legacy. I think she's got that ease." The 2 guys in the corner are both doing the laptop thing, which means they're either prepared or they want to look prepared, and I can't tell which. "Stop profiling the competition," Daniel said quietly. "I'm not profiling, I'm observing." "Your grandfather called it profiling. My grandfather was right about most things." She smoothed her jacket. "How do I look?" He looked at her. The interview clothes she'd chosen herself, nothing he'd suggested, nothing Claire had sent all her own. A dark blazer, clean lines, no unnecessary details. She looked like someone who had thought carefully about what she wanted to say before she walked into the room. "You look like someone they should give the scholarship to," he said. She rolled her eyes, but the color came into her face. "You're legally required to say that." "I'm legally required to feed and house you. The rest is voluntary." She pressed her lips together, fighting the smile, almost winning. "Go sit down," she said. "You're making me nervous by hovering." "I'm not hovering." "Dad." He went and sat down. He sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and 19 minutes, while Sophia was in the interview, and he did not look at his phone more than 3 times, which was a personal achievement. He thought about the Skyguard version 2 deployment timeline. He thought about the settlement terms Rachel was finalizing with Victor's attorney. He thought about the CV joint on the truck that he'd been meaning to replace for 6 weeks and kept not getting to. He did not think about the fact that his daughter was in a room right now making the case for her own future in a field he'd spent his adult life building in, and that he had had absolutely nothing to do with her choosing it. She'd gotten there herself, the way she got to everything. When she came out, her expression was neutral, practiced neutral, the careful face of someone who has decided not to show their hand, and she walked directly to him and said at a volume designed to travel approximately 2 feet, "I think it went well." "Yeah." The panel lead asked me about Skyguard. He went very still. "She was using it as a test case," Sophia said. "Asked me to walk through the engineering problem it was designed to solve. Why existing monitoring systems had failed to catch certain defect signatures." She paused. "I walked her through it. All of it. The fatigue parameter issue, the sensor calibration methodology. Why the Tucson incident represented a systemic gap and not an isolated failure." Daniel looked at her. "She asked me how I knew so much about it," Sophia said. "I told her I grew up around someone who worked on aviation safety systems. She said that was an interesting background for a scholarship applicant." She looked at him steadily. "She didn't ask who. I didn't say." "Sophia, I got there on my own, Dad," she said, quiet and certain. "I've been reading your patent filings since I was 13. I found them online, they're public record. You never told me to look. I just looked." She paused. "I'm not riding your coattails. I got curious and I did the work. That's different." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You've been reading my patent filings since you were 13. Some of them are surprisingly readable. Some of them are 400 pages. The appendices are mostly data tables. Those don't count." She picked up her bag. "Can we get food? I'm starving, and I was too nervous to eat breakfast, and that granola bar you keep in the truck does not count as breakfast." "It's sealed." "It does not count." He took her to the best steakhouse he could find within walking distance, and she ordered the ribeye without looking at the price, which was new, and he noted it without comment. They were halfway through the meal when her phone lit up on the table. She glanced at it, and then for the first time all day, her composure broke. Not dramatically, just a small real fracture. Her eyes went wide and her fork stopped. "Dad." "What?" She turned the phone to show him. It was an email. From the Hartwell Foundation. Subject line: finalist status update. "That's fast," he said. "Should I open it?" "It's your email, Soph. I know it's my email. Should I open it right now or—" Do you want to wait? No. She took a breath. No, I don't want to wait. She opened it. He watched her face. And he saw the moment, the precise, unmistakable moment, when she read the word she'd been working toward for 4 months. Her eyes stopped moving. Her breath stopped. For 2 full seconds, she was completely still. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were bright, in a way she was going to be embarrassed about in approximately 30 seconds. I got it, she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She understood what the hand meant. She understood everything his daughter. I got it, she said again, like she needed to say it twice to believe it. Yeah, he said. You did. She cried for exactly 45 seconds, then pulled herself together with the efficiency of someone who had decided that 45 seconds was the appropriate allotment and not a moment more. She wiped her eyes. She straightened. She picked up her fork. Don't tell anyone I cried, she said. Of course. I mean it. Sophia, who would I tell? She considered this. Ethan. I would never. You absolutely would tell Ethan. He said nothing. Dad, eat your steak, he said. You've earned it. She laughed again, and the restaurant was warm around them, and the steak was good, and Daniel Mercer sat across from his daughter in Chicago on a Thursday afternoon, and felt something so clean and complete that he almost didn't know what to do with it. So he just let it be. The flight home was quiet in the best way. Sophia fell asleep in the second seat 20 minutes late that he almost didn't know what to do with it. So he just let it be. The flight home was quiet in the best way. Sophia fell asleep in the second seat 20 minutes after takeoff. The crash of adrenaline, the aftermath of months of preparation, condensing into a single afternoon. She slept with her head against the window, and her arms folded, and her scholarship confirmation email open on her phone, the screen dim but still lit. Daniel flew. He preferred it this way, the actual physical flying, hands on the yoke, the cockpit instruments telling him exactly what the world was doing. No ambiguity, no performance. Just physics and attention, and the clean accountability of it. If you made a mistake up here, you knew immediately. The feedback was instant and honest. He'd always loved that about flying. He was 40 miles from home when his phone, clipped in the side mount, lit up with a message from Ethan. He couldn't read it safely while in the air, so he didn't. But the preview showed enough. Call me when you're down. Not urgent, but you need to know something. He landed. He taxied to the hangar. He waited until the crew had the aircraft secured and Sophia was gathering her things before he stepped aside and called. Ethan answered on the first ring. Good timing, Ethan said. Just landed. Sophia got the scholarship. A beat. That's the best news I've heard all week. He meant it. Daniel could hear it. Then, okay, here's what you need to know. Tell me. I got a call this afternoon from a journalist. Aviation industry publication, solid reputation. She's working on a piece about the Langford pitch deck situation, the NDA breach. She knows about the settlement negotiation. She has the broad strokes, and she's asking for comment. Daniel was quiet. She knows you're the Meridian principal, Ethan said. She also knows about the tarmac incident. Someone talked. Who? My guess is one of Langford's people, probably trying to get ahead of the story by framing it as a dispute between two executives rather than an NDA breach. He paused. The framing she's working with right now is not favorable to us. What's the framing? Industry power broker uses safety grounding to pressure competitor. A beat. The hydraulic actuator is real and documented, but she's been told by her source that the timing was convenient. Daniel absorbed this. The familiar sensation of something you'd managed carefully suddenly becoming public in a shape you hadn't chosen. He'd known this was a risk. He'd accepted it. He'd just hoped the story would wait until the settlement was done. Rachel knows, he said. She's already drafting the factual response. She wants to talk to you tonight. Tell her 9 o'clock. Done. Ethan paused. There's one more thing. Daniel waited. The journalist mentioned Claire by name, Ethan said carefully. In the context of the personal relationship angle, she's not leading with it, but she has it. She said, and I'm quoting, "We understand Mr. Mercer's ex-wife is now married to the Langford CEO. Is that relevant to the story?" The cockpit was very quiet. "What did you say?" Daniel asked. "I said that Mr. Mercer's personal life is not part of this story, that the safety grounding was a mechanical determination made by our lead technician, and that we'd have a full factual statement within 24 hours. Good. Daniel. Ethan's voice had the weight it got when he was saying something that mattered. If this goes public with that framing the personal angle, the ex-wife, the history, it becomes a completely different story. People will hear CEO grounds competitor's charter because of romantic rivalry, and they won't hear the hydraulic actuator. I know. It could damage Meridian's reputation, not permanently, but... I know Ethan. A pause. What do you want to do? He looked through the hangar door at the aircraft at the Phenom 300 that had carried his daughter to Chicago and back, that had the Skyguard system integrated in its avionics, that was currently registered in the name of a company he'd built in borrowed hangar space at age 31. I want to tell the truth, he said. The straight technical truth. Marcos found the defect. I concurred with his assessment. The aircraft was grounded for cause. The cause is documented. That's the story. That's the only story I'm interested in telling. And the personal angle. No comment. Respectfully, professionally, firmly. No comment. And if they run it anyway with the framing, then they run it, Daniel said. And people who know aviation will read the technical documentation and draw their own conclusions. And people who don't know aviation will read it as a personal story and forget about it in 3 days. He paused. Either way, the aircraft was grounded for cause. That fact doesn't change. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You know, Ethan said, most people in your position would at least be tempted to give her the personal angle. Let the story run. Let it hit Victor hard. I know. But you're not going to. No. Because of Sophia. He thought about that. Sophia's name in an article. Sophia's mother. Sophia's complicated, carefully navigated geography of 2 households. Partly, he said, and partly because it's not who I am. Another pause. All right, Ethan said. 9 o'clock with Rachel. 9 o'clock. He hung up and walked back to where Sophia was waiting, her garment bag over one shoulder, her scholarship email presumably still glowing in her pocket. Everything okay? She said. Work thing. Nothing serious. She looked at him. You're doing the thinking at me thing again. I'm fine, Soph. You sure? Completely. He took the garment bag from her shoulder. Let's go home. Rachel Osei. At 9 o'clock was a different creature than Rachel Osei at any other time of day. Not less precise, more. The evening focused her in a way that the daytime distributed. She laid out the situation in 11 minutes, which was about what Daniel had expected. The journalist's name is Marina Calloway, Rachel said. She writes for Aviation Week and 2 independent trade publications. Her work is generally fair and technically accurate. The source who spoke to her has given her a narrative that is not inaccurate in its facts, but misleading in its causation. Meaning they've told her the true things in the wrong order, Daniel said. Essentially, the true things are you own. Meridian, your ex-wife is married to Victor Langford. Victor chartered your aircraft. The aircraft was grounded. The settlement negotiation is underway. All true. The suggested causation is that the grounding was related to the personal history, which is demonstrably false given that the hydraulic actuator documentation predates any direct contact between you and the Langfords that day. Marcos's inspection report is time-stamped. Exactly. Marcos flagged the actuator at 5:58 in the morning. You didn't arrive at the airport until 8:15. The aircraft was already effectively grounded before you got there. She paused. Calloway may not know that. Then tell her. That's my recommendation. A factual statement. Time-stamped documentation. Marcos's credentials and inspection record. Let the technical truth carry the story. Rachel paused. I'd also recommend a brief on-record statement from you. Not lengthy, precise, first person. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the statement, about what he wanted to say, and what was worth saying, and what needed to be public, and what needed to stay private. Draft something, he said. Send it to me by midnight. I'll revise and approve before 7 tomorrow. Done. She paused. Daniel, one more thing. Yeah. Victor's attorney called me this afternoon, before the journalist situation came up. A beat. Victor wants a direct conversation, not through attorneys. He wants to talk to you. This was unexpected. He let the surprise register without showing it to Rachel, which was pointless, since they were on the phone, but the habit of containment was strong. About what? He said. His attorney said he wants to discuss the settlement directly, that he has information he wants to share in that context. Another beat. His words were, and I'll read it exactly, my client believes Mr. Mercer deserves to hear certain things from him directly, rather than through counsel or the press. Daniel sat with that for a moment. Victor Langford was not a stupid man. He'd built a mid-sized aviation company and kept it competitive in a brutal industry for 15 years. He was proud, and sometimes blunt, and had been caught doing something that had real legal exposure. But he wasn't stupid, which meant this wasn't strategy, or wasn't only strategy. When? Daniel said. He suggested tomorrow. Neutral location. Tell him yes, Daniel said. And tell Rachel I'll bring her number in case I need to step out and consult. There was a brief silence on the line. You're going to meet him. He said he has something to tell me directly. I'll hear it. Rachel's silence had the particular quality of a lawyer who has an opinion and is deciding whether to share it. Be careful, she said finally. I always am. No, she said. You're always precise. Careful is different. He thought about that after he hung up. He thought about the difference between precision and care. He wasn't sure she was wrong. Victor Langford showed up to the coffee meeting 10 minutes early. Daniel knew this because the cafe owner, a woman named Diane, who had been in that same location for 23 years and had strong opinions about parking, came over to his table when he arrived and said, unprompted, the silver-haired man's been here since 2:15. He's on his second coffee and he's been staring at the door. Daniel thanked her. He ordered his coffee and walked to the table. Victor looked up. He looked tired, not disheveled. He'd never be disheveled, but the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and doesn't clean up with good grooming. He stood when Daniel approached, which was either good manners or a nervous habit, and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. They sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Diane brought Daniel's coffee. Outside traffic moved. Someone at the counter was explaining with great conviction why the city's new transit proposal was fundamentally misguided. I asked to meet because I owe you an explanation, Victor said. Not an apology, though I imagine you'll receive that too. He looked at his coffee. An explanation first. Daniel waited. The pitch materials, Victor said. The Skyguard data. I want you to know, and I want you to know that I'm saying this without my attorney present, and understanding exactly what that means legally. I didn't direct my team to use that data. I didn't know they had until 4 days ago. Okay, Daniel said. I'm telling you that not because I think it gets me off the hook. It doesn't. The company is responsible for what its team does in its name. I'm telling you because I thought you should know whether you were dealing with a man who deliberately violated your trust, or a man who failed to supervise his own team adequately. He looked at Daniel directly. The latter is still a serious failure, but it's a different kind of failure. Daniel looked at him. He was looking for the performance in it, the strategic maneuvering dressed as candor. He didn't find it. That didn't mean it wasn't there, but it wasn't obvious. What happened? Daniel said. My strategy director. He's been with me 12 years. He took the data from the licensing negotiation materials and put it in the deck because it was compelling and he wanted the best possible pitch. He made a judgment call that he thought I'd approve of and didn't ask me directly because he didn't want to put me in a position of formally authorizing something questionable. Victor paused. Which tells you something about the culture of my company that I'm not proud of. Silence. He's no longer with the company, Victor said. That's your business. Yes. Another pause. I'm paying whatever the settlement requires. I want that to be clear. There's no negotiation from my side on the financial terms. Whatever Rachel Osei's drafted is acceptable. Daniel looked at him. Then why are we here? Victor looked at him for a long moment. The tired was more visible up close, the kind that comes from something more than work. Because of Claire, he said. Daniel set down his coffee. I know this is none of your business, Victor said. And I know you have every reason to tell me to handle my own affairs. But I'm sitting across from a man who knows her better than I do after 4 years of marriage, and I don't have a lot of other options. He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. She told me about the tarmac. What she said to you. The laugh. Daniel was very still. She told me that night, Victor said. She came home, and she sat at the kitchen table, and she told me everything. And then she said something I've been thinking about for 2 weeks. He looked at his coffee. She said, I think I married you because I wanted to stop feeling like I'd made a mistake. And I think I've spent 3 years trying to make the mistake bigger so I didn't have to look at it. The cafe noise continued around them. The transit debate at the counter had escalated. Daniel didn't say anything. I'm not telling you this because I want advice, Victor said. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I made my choices, she made hers, and here we are. He looked up. I'm telling you because she is someone who deserves better than what she's gotten. From me, maybe. And possibly from herself. He paused. And you should know that she's not doing well. He stopped. She's been having a hard time. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Why tell me, he said. Because Sophia needs her mother to be okay, Victor said. And you care about what Sophia needs more than anyone I've ever watched care about anything. He said it plainly without sentimentality. A simple observation. A true one. Daniel looked at the table. He thought about Sophia texting Claire about the Hartwell scholarship. Thought about what it took the 16-year-old grace of it, the act of choosing to maintain the relationship even when it was complicated. I'll reach out to her, he said finally. Victor nodded. Thank you. They sat for another few minutes in a silence that was not comfortable, but was somehow necessary. Two men who had arrived at a strange and complicated intersection of the same life, acknowledging it without pretending it was anything other than what it was. When Victor left, he shook Daniel's hand again. He said nothing else. Daniel sat with his coffee for a while after. I thought about what it cost a person to have that conversation. To walk into a room with the man whose life you'd walked into and say, I failed. I need your help. Here's why. He thought it had probably cost Victor more than almost anything else had in a long time. He also thought it had been the right thing to do. Those two things could both be true. He called Claire that evening. Not a text-to-call deliberate, because this was the kind of thing that needed a voice. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been near her phone. Daniel. Her voice had the quality he'd heard once before in their conversation, the unguarded one, the real register. Hi. Hi. He paused. Victor told me you're having a difficult time. Silence. He had no right to, she started. He did it because he thought you needed someone to reach out, and he couldn't be that someone right now, and I think he was probably right about both of those things. Another silence. Longer. I don't want you to think I'm falling apart, she said. And the way she said it, the effort of it, the specific pride behind it, told him more than the words did. I don't think that, he said. But I think you're carrying something you've been carrying for a while, and I think you maybe haven't had the space to set it down. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel. I'm not trying to. He paused, chose his words. I'm not calling as your ex-husband. I'm calling as someone who knows you, who's known you for a long time. He paused. You don't have to have a certain kind of conversation with me. I'm just saying I'm here if you need to talk. The silence on the line was different from the earlier ones, more open. I think I've been lying to myself, she said finally. About what I wanted, about what I was running toward, about a lot of things. Her voice was careful, but real. And I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to know yet, he said. How do you... She stopped. How do you always sound like that, like things are going to be okay? Because they usually are, he said. Eventually. The eventually is hard, but the outcome is usually okay. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry, something in between. I forgot that about you, she said. That steady thing. Still there. Yeah, she said softly. I can hear that. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not about Victor. Not about the settlement. Not about the tarmac, or the aircraft, or Meridian. Just talking. The way they used to in the early years before the weight of the distance between their expectations had made every conversation carry freight. When they said goodbye, she said, Thank you for calling. Look out for yourself, Claire. I'm trying, she said. I'm really trying. He believed her. He hung up and sat in the kitchen in the quiet house and felt the strange, specific weight of caring about someone without wanting anything from them in return. From upstairs, he could hear the faint sound of Sophia's music. Something with guitar, something low and rhythmic, the soundtrack she used when she was winding down from a long day. He sat downstairs and let the house be quiet around him. The marigolds were done for the season. He'd need to clear the bed before the first frost. He'd do it this weekend. There was always something that needed doing, and he'd always found that a comfort. Marina Calloway's article ran 6 days later. It was fair. He hadn't expected that had braced for the version Ethan had warned him about, the romantic rivalry, framing the personal angle leveraged for drama. Instead, she'd led with the hydraulic actuator. She'd run Marcos's credentials and the time-stamped inspection records. She'd quoted Rachel's statement directly and accurately. She'd mentioned the personal connection, Claire Victor Daniel, in the 14th paragraph. One sentence. Accurately characterized as disclosed by both parties as irrelevant to the mechanical determination. The article's real thrust was the broader systemic issue, the gap in contractor inspection protocols, the question of whether NDA-protected safety data was being circulated in investor pitches more broadly in the industry, the Meridian Skyguard as a case study in both technological efficacy and licensing vulnerability. It was objectively good journalism. Ethan called when it ran. Calloway did right by us, he said. She did right by the story, Daniel said. We happened to be in the story accurately. That's different. Always with the precision, Ethan said, but he was smiling. Daniel could hear it. The settlement finalizing today. This afternoon. Rachel will have the signatures by 4. Good. Daniel paused. And the version 2 deployment timeline. On track for the first quarter. Airlines are lined up. We've got 4 commercial carriers and 2 charter operators in the queue. Ethan paused. This is going to be significant, Daniel. The version 2 rollout. This is the one that goes wide. Daniel thought about 8 years. About borrowed hangar space and bad weather charters, and a prototype that had failed 3 times before it hadn't. About a patent filing that nobody had read except his daughter secretly at 13. Yeah, he said. I know. You sound calm about it. I am calm about it. Most people. I'm not most people, Ethan. A beat. No, Ethan said. You really aren't. The settlement was signed at 4:13 that afternoon. Victor's company paid. The terms were good, better than good. The licensing agreement renegotiation was included with new language that appropriately valued the data that had been improperly used. Daniel read the finalized documents twice. He signed where Rachel indicated. He filed the copies. Then he drove home in the truck that made a sound when he turned left because it still ran fine, and he knew how to fix it, and that was what mattered. He was pulling into the driveway when Sophia came out the front door. Dad? Hey. I made dinner. He stopped. You made dinner. Pasta. Don't make a thing of it. I'm not making a thing of it. You're doing the face. What face? The face where you're trying not to look surprised and pleased at the same time. She held the door open. It's probably terrible. I'm sure it's great. It's probably terrible, she repeated. But I tried. He went inside. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something burning slightly at the edges, which was exactly how most first attempts at cooking smelled. And the table was set, and his daughter stood at the stove with a wooden spoon and the posture of someone trying to project more confidence than she had. He sat down. He ate the pasta, which was not terrible. It was actually pretty good. He told her so. She said, "Don't patronize me." He said, "I'm not. It's good." She sat across from him, and they ate, and the kitchen was warm, and somewhere in the back of his mind, the settlement was signed, and the version 2 was on track, and the journalist had gotten the story right, and Claire was going to be okay, and Sophia had a scholarship, and all of that was true and real and solid. He was quiet about all of it. He always was. That was how he'd always been the most himself. The Skyguard version 2 launch happened on a Tuesday morning in early March, and Daniel watched it from a folding chair in Ethan's office, because he didn't own a proper conference room chair that he liked. Ethan had offered the executive suite. Daniel had taken the folding chair. The launch was not a press conference. It was not a ceremony. It was a deployment for commercial carriers activating the integrated system simultaneously across their active fleets. A coordinated technical rollout that Ethan's team had spent 11 months preparing, and that Daniel had spent the better part of 2 years developing the architecture for. What it looked like from a folding chair in a medium-sized office was a man watching a screen that showed network activation. Confirmations rolling in one by one, each one a green check mark. Each one representing an aircraft that was now running smarter, safer, more reliably than it had been the day before. No cameras. No applause. No moment where someone handed him something and shook his hand. Just green check marks one after another, and Ethan saying quietly from across the desk, "Atlanta's live," and then Denver's live, and then both Chicago hubs. And Daniel sitting in his folding chair drinking bad coffee and watching it happen. Marcos called at 10:42 when the last confirmation came through. He said 3 words, "All systems nominal." Daniel said, "Good work, Marcos." Marcos said, "Yes, sir," and hung up. That was the launch. Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked at Daniel and said, 8 years. 8 years, Daniel agreed. "You want to go get a drink?" "It's 10:45 in the morning. We could get breakfast that has a drink with it." "I have a call at 11:30. "Of course you do." Ethan shook his head. "Daniel, 8 years. You just deployed a safety system on 4 commercial carriers that is going to conservatively based on the version 1 data prevent somewhere between 2 and 4 catastrophic mechanical failures per year. Real planes. Real people." He paused. "You're allowed to sit with that for longer than 30 seconds. Daniel looked at the screen. All the check marks green. Everything nominal. "I'm sitting with it," he said. "You look like you're thinking about the 11:30 call." "I'm doing both." Ethan laughed, the real one, the one that had been the same since they were 19 years old. "You're impossible. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until it stops being true." He paused. "Which will be never so." The 11:30 call was with the Harwick Group. Not the investment consortium that had been evaluating Victor Langford's pitch, though that was where Daniel had first encountered the name. A different arm of the same organization, their direct investment division, which operated separately from their platform evaluation team, and had been watching Meridian with interest for the better part of a year. The call was led by a woman named Patricia Harwick herself, granddaughter of the founder in her early 50s with the reputation of someone who didn't take calls she didn't intend to conclude with a decision. "Mr. Mercer," she said when they'd exchanged the brief professional courtesies, "I'll be direct. We want to discuss a strategic investment in Meridian Aerotech, not an acquisition, a partnership. We'd want representation on the board and priority access to future licensing opportunities. In exchange, we're prepared to offer capital that would accelerate your version 2 deployment significantly and fund your version 3 development timeline." Daniel had known this was coming. Ethan had flagged it 3 weeks prior. He'd had time to think about it, had spent a number of those late-night kitchen table hours turning it over. "What does representation on the board mean to you specifically?" he said. "1 seat. Observer rights on technical decisions. No operational authority. And priority access to licensing. Right of first refusal on new territories, not exclusivity. Howe was quiet for a moment. On the screen in front of him, the green check marks were still visible. All systems nominal. I want to be clear about something, he said. Please. Meridian's technical direction is not subject to board input. Investment doesn't purchase influence over what we build or how we build it. The board seat gives you visibility and a voice in strategic financial decisions. Nothing more. A pause. We understand that. I want it in writing, specifically. We expected that, Patricia Harwick said, and he could hear the smile. Your attorney's reputation precedes her. Rachel's thorough. She's terrifying is what she is. A brief pause. Mr. Mercer, we've been watching what you've built. We don't want to change it. We want to be part of it. Another pause. There's a difference. He thought about that difference. He thought about it carefully the way he thought about everything that mattered. Send me the term sheet, he said. I'll have Rachel review it, and we'll talk again in a week. We'll have it to you by end of day. They said professional goodbyes and hung up. Ethan had been standing in the doorway for the last 4 minutes. Daniel looked at him. You heard that, Daniel said. Accidentally. You were standing in the doorway. I was passing by, slowly. Ethan came into the office and sat down. The Harwick Group. Yes. Patricia Harwick personally. Yes. Daniel. Ethan's voice had the quality it got when he was trying to locate the right register for something significant. This is, do you understand what this is? This is institutional validation at a level that, I understand what it is. We could accelerate the version 3 timeline by 18 months. We could fund the international licensing push without the current capital constraints. We could... Ethan. Yeah, I know. He looked at his friend. At the man who'd been there for the borrowed hangar space, and the failed prototypes, and the midnight bourbon in the kitchen. I know what it means. I'm not unaffected. You look unaffected. I'm choosing to process it quietly. Ethan studied him. Is that a thing, choosing to process quietly? It's definitely a thing. Can I process out loud on your behalf? If it helps you, it would help me enormously. Ethan spread his hands. The Harwick Group wants in. Daniel Mercer, who built this company in his garage while everyone thought he was just fixing other people's planes, has been approached by one of the most selective investment groups in private aviation. The man who got laughed at on a tarmac by his ex-wife is now sitting on a company that... Ethan. Too much. A little much. Ethan settled back. He looked at Daniel with the long, steady look of someone who has known you through enough versions of yourself to see all of them simultaneously. You're thinking about Sophia, he said. Daniel was in fact thinking about Sophia. I was thinking about how to tell her, and when, and what version of it she needed to hear. I was thinking about the fact that her first semester at university started in September, and that the version 2 launch, and the Harwick conversation, and the settlement, and all of it, was going to create a new phase of visibility for Meridian industry. Press, financial press. The kind of attention that had been manageable when the company was a smaller story, but would become harder to manage as it grew. I was thinking that Sophia was going to go to college, knowing more about her father's company than she had 6 months ago, and that she was going to encounter people who would know about it too, and that he wanted to have a real conversation with her before that happened. I should talk to her tonight, he said. Yeah, Ethan agreed. You should. Sophia was at the kitchen table when he got home, which was where she always was, which was one of the most reliable facts of his life. Laptop open, pencil behind her ear. The particular expression of someone managing 3 things at once and not finding it difficult. She looked up when he came in. Read his face in approximately 1 second, the way she always did. Good day or complicated day? Both, he said. How was school? Comparative literature is aggressively pointless, and calculus is still the only class that makes sense. She closed the laptop. Something happened. Skyguard version 2 deployed this morning. She straightened. All 4 carriers. All four. All systems nominal. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, and then she smiled. Not the managed smile, not the careful one, the real one. Dad, that's huge. It's significant, yes. It's huge, don't hedge. She shook her head. All four carriers live. 8 years of work and it's actually running on... She stopped. Something moved through her expression. The panel lead, at the Hartwell interview. She asked me about Skyguard. I know. And I didn't know it was fully deployed yet. I gave her the development context. She looked at him. If I'd known... You answered honestly based on what you knew. That's better. She considered this. When were you going to tell me it was going live? He sat down across from her. Today. I'm telling you today. She studied him. There's more. He looked at his daughter. He thought about Patricia Harwick's voice on the phone. The clean directness of it. The phrase, we don't want to change it, we want to be part of it. He thought about what was coming, what was clearly inevitably coming in terms of the company's profile. The Harwick Group reached out, he said. They want to make a strategic investment. Sophia was quiet for a moment. The Harwick Group, she said slowly. The private aviation investment. Yes. That Harwick Group. There's only one. She leaned back in her chair. She processed it the way she processed significant things, visibly, honestly, without pretending it was smaller than it was. How big, she said. We're still in term sheet phase, but significant. Which means Meridian is going to be... She stopped. More visible than it has been, he said. Yes. Another silence. He watched her work through it, not the business implications which she could understand, but weren't really the point, but the personal ones. The implications for her life, her identity, the navigation she'd been doing since she was old enough to understand that her father was something other than what he appeared. People at school are going to know, she said. Eventually, yes. They already kind of know, after the article. She paused. Marina Calloway's piece. Someone in my AP physics class showed it to me the day it ran. Asked if the Mercer in the article was related to me. She looked at him. I said yes. He hadn't known this. What did they say? She said, wait, your dad owns the Skyguard company. And I said yes, and she said, that's incredibly cool. And then the bell rang. Sophia shrugged. It was fine. Were you okay with it? I was fine, she said again, and this time he believed it because she didn't say fine the way people say it when they mean something else. She said it the way she said things she'd actually thought through. I spent a long time, years kind of wondering why you never talked about it. Why it was this quiet thing. She paused. And then I figured out why. And after I figured out why, I was okay with it. Why did you figure I kept it quiet? She looked at him steadily. Same reason you told me about it piece by piece in the way that let me understand it, instead of just being shocked by it. Same reason you still drive the same truck, and still live in this house, and still make terrible coffee at 6 in the morning. He said nothing. You wanted it to mean something, she said. The building. Not the having built, the actual work. And you knew that if people knew if the outside of your life matched the inside of what you'd built, they'd only see the outcome and not the process. She paused. And to you, the process is the whole point. He looked at his daughter. He thought not for the first time that she had gotten somewhere he was still walking toward. When did you figure that out? He said. Probably around the time I was reading your patent filings, she said, perfectly casual, picking up her pencil. The methodology sections are very revealing about how you think. He laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. You analyzed my methodology. I was 13. I had a lot of time. She opened her laptop again. Dinner is leftover pasta. I know it's not exciting. The pasta was good. It was passable. I genuinely thought it was good. Dad, you eat granola bars that have been in the glove compartment for a week. Your bar for food quality is not the standard I'm measuring against. She was already typing. Go eat. You look tired. He went and ate the leftover pasta, which was in fact still good. 2 weeks after the version 2 launch, the Harwick term sheet arrived. It was 43 pages. Rachel reviewed it in 36 hours, returned it with 27 annotations, and told Daniel on the phone that it was overall a serious document from serious people who have done their homework. That was high praise from Rachel. He read it himself over 2 evenings, made his own notes, cross-referenced the board representation language with the specific wording he'd asked for. It was there exactly as discussed. One seat observer rights, no operational authority explicitly stated. He approved Rachel's recommended revisions. And then, on a Thursday morning while Sophia was at school, he called someone he hadn't called in a long time. His mother. Eleanor Mercer was 71 and lived in coastal Georgia and had opinions about weather, coastal erosion, and her son's work-life balance that she delivered with the precision of someone who had been perfecting the delivery for decades. She'd known about Meridian for 4 years. He'd told her when the first licensing agreement was signed because she was his mother, and she'd needed to know, and also because she'd been one of the few people in his life who'd watched him work through the hard years without once suggesting he should do something more practical. "Daniel," she said when she answered. Not a question, not a greeting, just his name the way she'd always said it, like a whole sentence compressed into 2 syllables. "Hi, Mom. Version 2 deployed. You saw the article. I see everything. I have internet access and too much time." A pause. "How does it feel?" He thought about that. The honest answer. "Like I can breathe in a way I couldn't before," he said. "Like something that was a hypothesis is now a fact." "It was always a fact," she said. "It just wasn't deployed yet." "Those aren't the same thing." "To the people those planes are going to keep safe, they're the same thing." A pause. "And the Harwick situation?" He paused. "How do you know about that?" "Ethan called me." "Ethan called?" "He calls me occasionally. Has for years. He thinks you don't tell me enough and he's correcting for it." Another pause. "He's not wrong." Daniel sat with that for a moment. The image of Ethan calling his mother on a semi-regular basis to provide status updates on Daniel's life. It was so specific and so Ethan that it was impossible to be annoyed about. "I was going to tell you," he said. "You were going to tell me when it was finalized," she said. "You were going to present it as a complete thing so I couldn't worry about the process." "That's not Daniel." "Okay," he said. "That's accurate." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what your father used to say about you, Mom. He used to say that you were the only person he knew who treated good news the same way other people treated bad news. Held it close, processed it alone, didn't let it out until you'd made sure it was real." She paused. "He meant it as a compliment, mostly." "Mostly. He also thought you needed to let people celebrate you a little more. That the quiet isn't always protection. Sometimes it's just lonely." He sat with that. The kitchen was very quiet around him. The marigold bed outside was bare. He'd cleared it weeks ago, as he'd planned. He'd need to plant again in the spring. Something for Sophia. She still liked marigolds. "I'm okay, Mom," he said. "I promise." "I know you're okay. You're always okay." A pause. "I'm asking if you're also happy." I thought about it. The real question. The one that didn't have a performance answer. He thought about Sophia eating her own cooking across the kitchen table, with that carefully managed expression of someone trying not to show they were proud of themselves. He thought about the green check marks one after another. He thought about Rachel's voice saying she's terrifying is what she is. He thought about Ethan saying 8 years in the precise tone that 8 years deserved. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." "Good," his mother said. "That's all I wanted to know." And then, "Now tell me about Sophia and the scholarship, and why you didn't call me the minute she got it, because Ethan told me that too, and I've been patient about it for 3 weeks." The Harwick agreement was signed on a Friday afternoon. Rachel was there. Ethan was there. Patricia Harwick and her senior counsel flew in and were precise and professional and shook everyone's hand with the decisive grip of people who had made a decision they were confident in. There was, at Rachel's insistence, a bottle of champagne. Daniel had a glass. One glass. It was good champagne, the kind that cost more than his weekly grocery bill, and he drank it and felt the day settle into something permanent and real. Patricia Harwick stood next to him after the formal signing and said, "You know what struck us most in all our due diligence on Meridian? Tell me." Every person we interviewed, employees, contractors, maintenance personnel, former clients, every single one of them said the same thing about you. She paused. They said he doesn't build things to prove a point. He builds things because they need to exist. Daniel looked at her. That's unusual, she said. In our experience, most founders at your level are proving something. To an investor, a competitor, a parent, an ex-partner. She looked at him carefully. But you were just building. He thought about a turboprop that had made a gear-up landing on a dirt strip when he was 24. He thought about a young engineer sitting in an empty hangar thinking this system is broken. Something needed to not be broken, he said. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. That's exactly what I mean. He told Sophia about the Harwick agreement that same evening. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, always the kitchen table, and laid it out plainly, the way he laid everything out for her. The investment amount. What it meant for the company's trajectory. The version 3 development timeline it unlocked. The board structure and what it did and didn't give the investor. She listened without interrupting, which was what she did when she was taking things seriously. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. How does it change things for you? She said. Personally. He thought about it. It doesn't change much, he said. The work is still the work. The company still runs the way it runs. But you're going to be less, she paused. Less invisible. Probably. She considered that. You hate that. I don't hate it, he said. I've made my peace with it. That's not the same as not hating it. He smiled slightly. No, he agreed. It's not. She was quiet again. Then she said something that surprised him. I'm glad people are going to know, she said. I know that's not how you feel about it, but I'm glad. Why? Because you built something important, and you built it right, and the quiet was... She stopped looking for the word. The quiet was yours. You needed it for a while. But it was also, I don't know. It sometimes felt like you were letting people be wrong about you, because correcting them wasn't worth the energy. She looked at him. And maybe that was the right call. But some of those people being wrong about you... She paused. Some of that cost you things. I understood what she meant. What she wasn't saying directly because she was 16 and navigating the complexity of parents and their histories with a grace that exceeded her years. Your mother, he said. Sophia looked at the table. I'm not saying it was your fault, or hers. I'm just saying. She paused. If she'd known, really known, maybe things would have been different. Maybe, he said. Or maybe not. People's choices come from complicated places, Soph. Information doesn't always change them. But it might have, she said. You don't know. He didn't know. That was true. No, he said. I don't. She looked at him for a moment, her grandfather's eyes steady and clear. Are you sad about that still? He thought about it. The honest answer. Not the way I was, he said. It shifted. The way things shift when enough time passes and enough happens. He paused. I hope she's okay. I want her to be okay. That's what's left of it. Sophia nodded slowly. She's doing better, she said. She told me last week. Good, he said, and meant it. They sat in the warm kitchen, and the evening moved around them, and after a while, Sophia opened her laptop and went back to the calculus that was the only class that made sense, and Daniel made coffee, the terrible 6 a.m. kind, deployed in the evening without apology, and sat across from her. He thought about 8 years, about what gets built in the dark, about the specific faith required to build something in a borrowed hangar when nobody is watching, and the prototype has failed for the 3rd time, and the woman you love has a look in her eyes that's starting to mean something you don't want to name. The faith that the thing is worth building regardless, that the building itself is the answer. He sipped his coffee. Sophia, without looking up from her screen, said, This coffee is terrible. It's reliable. Those aren't the same thing. In coffee they are. She looked up. The managed expression. The losing battle with the smile. You're impossible, she said. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until it stops being true. She went back to her work. He watched her for a moment. This person he'd built a life around who had built herself while he wasn't looking and come out the other side into something extraordinary. His phone buzzed. A message from Ethan Callaway's editor wants a follow-up piece. The version 2 launched the Harwick deal. Bigger profile. Your call. He typed back factual information only. No personal angle. Ethan, obviously. Also your mother says hi. Daniel stared at his phone. He typed, I know you call her. Ethan. She worries. I correct for it. You're welcome. Daniel set the phone face down on the table. Ethan, Sophia said without looking up. Ethan. He confirmed. He calls Grandma Eleanor, you know. I know. Has for years. I know. She did look up then, and she smiled, the real one, the full one. You have good people around you, Dad. He looked at his daughter, at the kitchen table, at the life that looked quiet from the outside, because everything important about it was on the inside. Yeah, he said. I really do. The evening settled around them warm and ordinary, and completely, irreversibly his. 3 days before Sophia's last week of school, Claire called. Not the guarded call of someone managing an awkward connection. A different call. Her voice was different too. Lighter, steadier, the real one without the weight of performance behind it. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Tell me. Victor and I are separating. She said it plainly without drama. Officially, we've been working with our attorneys for the past month. She paused. It's not ugly, it's just honest. We both know it was built on the wrong foundation, and we're choosing to acknowledge that before we make it worse. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? Surprisingly, yes. She paused. That's what I wanted to tell you. Not the separation, you'll probably hear about that through other channels anyway. But the okay part. A beat. I wanted you to know I'm actually okay. Not performing okay. Actually okay. I'm glad, he said. I know you are, she said. That's the thing that kept surprising me. About you. Even after everything. She paused. You just were never rooting against me. No, he said. I wasn't. Most people would have been. I'm not most people. A small sound, something between a laugh and an exhale. No, she said softly. You really aren't. A pause. Sophia told me about the Harwick deal. She's very proud of you. She says it like she's being casual, but she's not casual at all. She's never casual, he said. She just looks it. She gets that from you, Claire said. I thought about that. About all the things Sophia carried from each of them, the visible things and the invisible ones, the ones she'd chosen and the ones that had simply arrived. She's going to be remarkable, he said. She already is, Claire said. You made that happen. We both... Daniel. Her voice was gentle but direct. You made that happen. Let me say it. You made that happen. He let her say it. They talked for a little while longer. Not about the past, not about the architecture of what had gone wrong. Just about Sophia mostly. About her first semester starting in September. About the scholarship and what it meant, and the way she'd cried for 45 seconds in a Chicago restaurant and then picked up her fork. Claire laughed when he told her that. She timed it, she said. 45 seconds. I think she did, yes. That is the most Sophia thing I've ever heard. I know. They said goodbye. The way you say goodbye when something has been fully closed, and what replaces it is not grief, but something cleaner. Not distance. Something more like the right amount of space. He put the phone down and went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Real dinner, not pasta, not granola bars. Something he'd have to pay attention to. When Sophia came downstairs drawn by the smell, she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. You're cooking, she said. Attempting. Something actually happened today, didn't it? He looked at her over his shoulder. Your mother and Victor are separating. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her process it, the teenager version, which was faster and more hidden than the adult version, but no less real. Is she okay? Sophia said. She says yes. I believe her. Another moment. Okay. She came into the kitchen and sat at the table. Good. Yeah. Dad. Yeah. Whatever you're making, if it's not good, I'm ordering pizza. Fair, he said. It was in fact not bad. She didn't order pizza. She did say afterward, I'd call it a 7 out of 10, which from Sophia with her granola bar in the glove compartment frame of reference was high praise. He took it. The letter came on a Wednesday morning in June, 9 days before Sophia's high school graduation. Daniel found it in the stack of mail he'd pulled from the box at the end of the driveway. The usual rotation of utility statements, industry newsletters, the occasional piece of actual correspondence that still arrived in paper form, because some of the people he dealt with were old enough to prefer it. The letter was near the bottom. Plain envelope. His name handwritten on the front. No return address. He recognized the handwriting. He stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, holding at the morning traffic on Birchmore Lane, doing its ordinary thing around him. He turned the envelope over, ran his thumb along the sealed edge. Then he went inside and put it on the kitchen table and made coffee and stood at the counter and looked at it. He opened it after the coffee was ready. It was 3 pages. Handwritten, which told him it had been written by hand on purpose, a choice, a deliberate slowing down. He knew the handwriting well enough to read it without effort, and he did standing at the counter with his coffee getting cold. Claire had written it over several nights apparently. She said so in the second paragraph. She'd started and stopped 4 times. She'd considered typing it, and then decided the typing felt like a kind of armor she didn't want to use. She wrote about the tarmac first. Not what she'd said he knew what she'd said, but what had been true for her in that moment. She wrote that the laugh had been a defense mechanism, that she'd felt something shift when she saw him standing there in the familiar jacket and the familiar posture of complete self-possession, and that the shift had frightened her, and the laugh had been her covering it over. She wrote, I laughed because I was starting to understand something I didn't want to understand yet. And making you smaller felt safer than sitting with that feeling. He read that sentence twice. She wrote about the years of the marriage, not the failing of it, but the parts before the failing. The parts he'd sometimes wondered if she remembered. She remembered them. She wrote about a specific Saturday morning in the 2nd year of the marriage, when he'd been in the garage at 7 a.m., working on something she hadn't understood, and she'd brought him coffee, and he'd looked up with the expression he had when something was almost solving itself, and she'd stood in the garage doorway and thought, he is the most alive person I've ever seen. And then she'd looked at the garage around him, the ordered clutter, the tools, the worn work table, and she'd thought, and this is never going to be enough for me. She wrote, that was the moment. Not the arguments, not the separation, not the mediator's office. That morning. That was when I made my choice. I just didn't tell you or myself for another 18 months. He set his coffee down. She wrote about Victor. Not with bitterness. He'd expected bitterness, and it wasn't there. She wrote about what she'd been looking for, what Victor had represented, the specific type of visible success she'd understood as security and had confused for something deeper. She wrote that it hadn't been Victor's fault, that he'd been a symbol before he'd been a person, and that she'd done him a disservice by that, and she'd told him so directly. She wrote, I've spent 2 years being very honest with everyone except myself. I'm working on that. The last page was shorter. She wrote about Sophia, about watching her daughter grow into the particular person she'd become, and understanding clearly and without self-deception. How much of that was Daniel? Not all of it. Sophia was her own construction built of materials from everywhere and assembled by herself. But the architecture, the way she thought about problems, the refusal to announce herself, the patience with her own process, that was his. She wrote, you taught her that achievement doesn't require an audience. That's the most valuable thing anyone could teach a person. I didn't learn it. She did. Because of you. At the bottom she'd written, I'm not writing this because I want anything from you. I know it might feel that way, and I understand if it does. I'm writing it because some truths have an expiration date, and this one needs to be said while it's still perfectly true. You were the right person. I just wasn't ready to be in the room with someone that real." He read it once more. Then he folded it along its original creases and put it back in the envelope and set it on the kitchen table. He stood there for a long moment. Then he went upstairs, knocked on Sophia's door, waited for the groggy permission to enter, and stood in the doorway and said, "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Don't make me call up twice." She said from somewhere under her pillow, "It's 7 a.m. You have the AP review session at 9. A silence. "I hate you." "I love you too. 20 minutes. He went back downstairs and made breakfast. He didn't tell Sophia about the letter. He filed it in the locked room, not hidden, just private where it belonged. Some things didn't need to be shared. Some things were complete in themselves, received and understood, and then carried quietly. He'd write back. He'd decided that before he finished reading. Not immediately, not because he was withholding, but because a letter like that deserved a real response, not a reflexive one. He'd think about what was true. He'd write it in his own words, carefully, honestly. He'd tell her that he received what she'd said, that he understood it, that he believed her. He'd tell her that the garage Saturday morning he remembered it too. That it was one of the clearest memories he had of the marriage. That he'd watched her in the doorway holding the coffee, and thought, she's going to leave someday, and I'm not going to be able to stop it. And he'd gone back to the work because the work was what he had. He'd tell her that he didn't blame her. He'd already told her that in pieces over various conversations. But this time, he'd put it in a letter because she'd put hers in a letter, and some things needed to match. He'd write it over the weekend. First, there was a graduation to get through. The week before the ceremony. Ethan called with something that had been building for 2 months and had finally arrived. "Aviation Safety Quarterly," Ethan said, and his voice had the quality it got when he was leading somewhere significant. "They're doing their annual technical impact feature. They want to include Skyguard as a case study." "Fine," Daniel said. "Send them the technical documentation package. That's the thing." A pause. "They want more than documentation. They've confirmed 4 incidents, 2 in the past 8 months, where version 2's anomaly detection flagged mechanical issues before any traditional monitoring system showed a flag. In both cases, the planes were grounded preemptively. Both inspections confirmed the defects." Daniel was quiet. 2 planes, Ethan said. A combined passenger capacity of roughly 340 people. The number sat between them. "They want to do a full piece," Ethan said. "The technology, the development history, the deployment. They want your input, on record." "I'll talk to them," Daniel said. A pause. "Just like that." "This is what the thing was for," Daniel said. "This. Not the Harwick deal, not the deployment metrics. This is what it was for." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is. Set up the interview, technical focus. I'll walk them through the methodology. They're going to want some personal history too, the development years." "Factual," Daniel said. "I'll give them factual. How long it took, what problems needed solving, what the Tucson incident represented systemically. Not performance, not narrative. Facts. Rachel will love you for that." "Rachel always loves me. It's my best quality." Ethan laughed. "I'll set it up." The interview ran 2 weeks after graduation. The journalist was a man named Paul Dexter, who had written about aviation safety for 20 years and approached the subject with the reverence of someone who understood exactly what the stakes were. He didn't need the story dressed up. He understood it plainly. They talked for 3 hours. Dexter asked about the Tucson incident, the turboprop, the gear-up landing, the young engineer in the empty hangar afterward. Daniel told it without embellishment. He told it the way it had happened, a man watching a system fail, deciding that the failure was preventable, spending 8 years making it preventable. Dexter asked about this development period. Daniel talked about the borrowed hangar space, the failed prototypes, the grant applications, the charter flying in bad weather. He talked about Marcos gave him full credit for the inspection protocol refinements that had made version 2's anomaly detection significantly more precise than the original. Dexter asked carefully about the period when the company's existence hadn't been widely known. He didn't ask about Claire directly. He was too good a journalist for that, but the question was present in the phrasing. Daniel said, "There were personal reasons for keeping a lower profile during the development phase. I had priorities outside the work that required a certain kind of stability. I don't regret the approach." Dexter nodded, wrote something down, didn't push. At the end of the interview, Dexter set down his recorder and set off the record. "I've covered a lot of safety technology development. Most of the founders I talked to somewhere in the conversation, they tell me about the investors who believed in them early, or the moment the breakthrough happened, and they knew it was going to work." He paused. "You haven't talked about any of that." "Because those aren't the interesting parts," Daniel said. "What are the interesting parts?" Daniel thought about a specific night at age 32, running the second iteration of the prototype alone in a borrowed hangar at 2 in the morning, when the diagnostic had shown a failure pattern he hadn't anticipated, and he'd sat on the floor against the wall and thought with complete clarity, this might not work. And then had thought with equal clarity, do it anyway. "The part where you're not sure it's going to work," he said. "And you do it anyway. That's the interesting part. Everything after that is logistics." Dexter looked at him for a moment. "Can I use that on record?" "Yes," Daniel said. It became the closing line of the article. Sophia's graduation was on a Saturday afternoon. The week leading up to it had been the particular organized chaos of senior year-ending final exams, ceremony rehearsals, the social obligations of a graduating class, saying goodbye to itself. Sophia had navigated all of it with the efficient, slightly exhausted competence she brought to most things, and on the Friday night before the ceremony, she came downstairs at 11 p.m. and found Daniel at the kitchen table and said, "I can't sleep." "Normal," he said. "I know it's normal. I still can't sleep." She sat across from him. She was wearing the old sweatshirt she'd had since 8th grade that she refused to retire because she said it was structurally sound. She looked young in it. She looked like herself. "Tell me something." "About what?" "I don't know. Something." She pulled her feet up under her on the chair. "Something you haven't told me before." I thought about that. He thought about what he hadn't told her in the specific sense she meant not facts she didn't know, but things he'd carried that she hadn't been given access to yet. "The night the version 1 worked," he said. "When the diagnostic finally ran clean. I was alone in the hangar. It was 2 in the morning. He paused. "I cried." She looked at him. "Briefly," he said. "Maybe 3 minutes. And then I got up and checked the data again because I needed to make sure I'd actually read it right before I let myself believe it." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you cried about it." "Nobody did. That was the only time, and I was alone." She absorbed that. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you asked for something I hadn't told you before, and because tomorrow you're going to walk across a stage and start the next part of your life. And I wanted you to know that the moments that matter most usually happen when nobody's watching, and that's okay. That's actually right." She looked at him for a long time, the steady look, the clear one. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." She said it simply without qualification. The real version of the phrase without any of the management around it. He nodded once. She uncurled from the chair. "I'm going to try to sleep." "Good." She was at the kitchen door when she turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm proud of you too. Not just the company, not the Harwick deal or the deployments or any of that." She paused. "You. How you did it. How you stayed who you were the whole time." "I didn't say anything." "Don't get sentimental," she said. "I'm not." "You're absolutely getting sentimental." "Good night, Sophia." She went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and felt the weight of everything the past 2 years had contained. And then he let most of it go, because there was a graduation in the morning and his daughter needed him present and steady and completely there. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in months. The ceremony was 2 hours long, and Sophia walked across the stage in the middle of the alphabet, and when they called her name, Daniel was already on his feet before he'd decided to stand up. Which was embarrassing, but not as embarrassing as it would have been if he'd been the only one. But he was. Ethan was seated next to him and laughed immediately. Daniel sat back down. "You were the only one standing," Ethan said quietly, still smiling. "I'm aware. She's going to hear about this. I know." Sophia from the stage had seen him stand. He knew because she'd looked directly at him for 1 second and then looked back at the stage with a very controlled expression that meant she was trying not to laugh at him during her graduation ceremony. He'd take it. After in the field, where families gathered with their graduates, and the summer air was warm, and the photographs were being taken everywhere. Sophia found him in the crowd and walked straight to him, and he hugged her, a real one. Both arms, the kind he didn't deploy often, because she was 16 and the currency had to be spent carefully, and she hugged him back and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped back and said, "You stood up alone." "I know. Ethan sent me a video." "Of course he did. It's already on my phone." "Sophia, I'm going to treasure it forever." "Good," he said. "You should." He looked at her in her graduation regalia with the cap slightly crooked because she'd stopped caring about the cap approximately 30 minutes after putting it on. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 16 years, cataloging without getting caught. Except he wasn't trying not to get caught anymore. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because of the scholarship or the Hartwell or the grades. Because of who you are." She had the look, the fighting the smile look. "You're going to make me cry at my own graduation." "No, I'm not." "You kind of are. You cried for exactly 45 seconds in a Chicago steakhouse and then picked up your fork. You'll be fine." She laughed, the real one, and it was the best sound in the world in that field on that day, with the summer air warm around them. Ethan materialized from somewhere and shook Sophia's hand with formal gravity and said, "Congratulations, Miss Mercer. You've managed to grow up despite your father's deeply inadvisable approach to breakfast food." Sophia said, "Thank you, Ethan. He gave me a sealed granola bar this morning." "It was from this week," Daniel said. "It was not from this week," Sophia said. "It was Dad." And Claire was there. I hadn't known she was coming. Sophia hadn't mentioned it deliberately, he understood later, because she hadn't wanted either of them to spend the preceding week managing it. She'd just invited her mother and let it be what it was. Claire was standing at the edge of the family grouping a few feet back, giving him the space to see her before she approached. She looked well, genuinely not performed well. Lighter the way someone looks when they've set something heavy down and had long enough to let their posture recover. Their eyes met. He nodded once. She nodded back. Sophia turned and saw her mother and went to her without hesitation. Went to her the way teenagers go to parents. They've chosen to keep loving through complicated circumstances, which is to say, directly and without apology. Claire held her daughter, and her eyes were closed, and her expression was the face of a woman who understood clearly what she had and was grateful for it. When they separated, Claire looked at Daniel. She walked the few steps between them. "Thank you for not making this strange," she said quietly. "It's her graduation," he said. "I know." She paused. "I sent you a letter." "I got it." "You don't have to." "I'm going to write back," he said. "Give me a week." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face settled, not relief exactly, but something adjacent. The specific feeling of a thing being received. "Okay," she said. They stood together for a few minutes, in the easy discomfort of people who have a long history and are learning how to carry it without it being the main thing in the room. It got easier as the minutes passed. It got easier because Sophia was between them, and Sophia had a way of making complicated things simpler without even trying, just by being so completely and confidently herself. Ethan took a photograph of Daniel and Sophia that Daniel hadn't asked him to take, which he discovered when his phone buzzed later with the message, "For the record." He looked at the photograph. Sophia in her crooked cap. Him with his hand on her shoulder, looking at her, not at the camera. The afternoon light very good. He saved it. 2 weeks after graduation, the Aviation Safety Quarterly piece ran. It was the cover. Daniel hadn't expected the cover. He'd expected an interior feature thorough, well-written technical, not the cover. Ethan sent him a message at 6:40 in the morning that said only, "Go look at your email," which was the kind of message Ethan sent when he wanted to be present for a reaction but couldn't be physically present. Daniel looked at the email. The cover image was not of him. It was of the SkyGuard diagnostic interface, a clean technical graphic, all green readouts, the system running precisely as designed. His name appeared in the headline, Meridian's Mercer, How One Engineer's 8-Year Obsession is Changing Aviation Safety. He read the piece standing at the kitchen counter with cold coffee. It was good. Dexter had written it well, technically rigorous, the personal history present, but not indulgent. The Tucson story. The failed prototypes. The development years without a name attached to them. And at the end, the quote he'd approved on record. The interesting part is when you're not sure it's going to work and you do it anyway. Everything after that is logistics. He called Ethan at 6:55. "The cover," he said. The cover," Ethan confirmed. "I said technical focus. You said technical focus. Dexter also made editorial decisions. You can't control everything." A pause. "It's a good piece. It's an exceptional piece. Marcos is in it. He's thrilled, by the way. Also deeply pretending not to be thrilled. Very much your energy. Don't tell him I said that, obviously." A pause, and in it, Daniel could hear Ethan doing the thing he did when he was deciding whether to say the next thing. He said it. "You should be proud. Not of the cover, of the thing that got you the cover." Daniel thought about a 24-year-old standing in an empty hangar, thinking this system is broken. About a 31-year-old running a prototype at 2 in the morning in a borrowed space. About 8 years of working in the dark because the work needed doing regardless of whether anyone was watching. "I am," he said. "Good," Ethan said. "Because I've been proud of you for a long time, and it's nice when you're in the same place I am." Daniel did not get sentimental about this. I was perhaps a very small amount sentimental about this. He went and woke Sophia up at 7 a.m., even though it was a Saturday, and technically she'd earned the sleep because he wanted to show her the cover in real time and watch her face when she read it. She came downstairs looking like someone had interrupted something important. He held up his phone. She squinted at it, took the phone, read the headline, read it again. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. This is the cover." "I know." She read the piece, right there at the kitchen table in the old sweatshirt, standing because she hadn't sat down yet, reading it completely. He watched her face move through it, serious first, then something softer, then at the closing quote, something that had the same quality as the 45 seconds in Chicago. She held it together this time. She put the phone down. "You said it right," she said. "The thing about doing it anyway. That's the right thing to say. I've had time to figure out what the right thing to say is." 8 years, she said. 8 years, he agreed. She sat down at the kitchen table. She looked at him with the clear, steady eyes that were her grandfather's and her own. "What happens now?" she said. "The version 3 development starts in the fall. The Harwick partnership gives us the runway to expand the licensing to international carriers. There are 3 conversations in the queue that Ethan's been managing." He paused. "And you go to university in September. And you'll be here," she said. "In this house. For a while. In the truck. Until it stops running." She shook her head slowly. "You know you can afford a new truck. This one runs fine. It makes a sound. When I turn left," he said. "I know. I'll fix it. When it stops running fine." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to be okay," she said. "When I leave for school, right?" He looked at his daughter. He thought about September, the particular specific silence of a house that had held 2 people for 4 years and would hold 1. He thought about the kitchen table without the laptop, the coat hook without the second jacket, the truck turning left alone. "I'm going to be okay," he said. "Dad, I'm going to be fine, and I'm going to miss you enormously, and both those things are true at the same time. He paused. I know how to live with complicated true things. She looked at him. She said, You've always known how. He wrote Claire's letter on a Sunday afternoon in July. He took his time. He told the truth, the full unperformed version. He told her about the garage Saturday morning. He told her he'd known in that moment before she had what the distance between them meant. He told her he wasn't writing to revisit it or to reclaim anything. He was writing because she'd been real with him, and he owed her the same. He wrote, You were right that I stayed quiet longer than I needed to. Not because of strategy. Because the quiet was the only place where things were just what they were, and I was afraid of losing that. I understand now that you can want honesty in your life and still protect your own life so carefully that you don't let anyone else in to see it. I did that. I'm not sure I'd do it differently, but I understand it better now than I did. He wrote, You said I was the right person. I believe you meant that. I also believe the timing was wrong, and that timing is a real thing that matters, and that two people can be right for each other and still arrive at the wrong moment and miss each other entirely. That's not failure. That's just how it happened. He wrote, Take good care of yourself. Let Sophia see you doing it. She watches even when you think she's not looking. He signed it with his name. Just his name. He sealed the envelope. He wrote her address in his handwriting. He put a stamp on it. He drove to the post office in the truck that made a sound when he turned left, and he dropped the letter in the slot, and he drove home. The day Sophia left for university, he drove her to the airport in the truck. She'd wanted to fly. Of course she'd wanted to fly. She was 18, and she had a Hartwell scholarship in aerospace engineering, and her father owned a Phenom 300, and the idea of checking a bag onto a commercial flight when there was a perfectly good option available was difficult to justify rationally. But she'd also said the week before, I kind of want to take the truck. He'd looked at her. Just to the airport, she said. The regular way. Me and you in the truck. She'd paused. Last time for a while. He'd said, okay. So they drove to the airport in the truck. It made its sound on Creston Avenue, and she didn't say anything about it. She had her headphones around her neck and her overpacked duffel in the truck bed and a printout of her dorm assignment that she'd been referencing approximately every 40 minutes for the past 3 days. They talked about small things. The dorm layout. The calculus sequence she'd be starting. A professor whose work she'd read online and was cautiously excited about. Small things that were really large things in disguise, the way most important conversations are. At the airport drop-off, he pulled the duffel from the truck bed and set it on the curb, and she stood there in the morning with her headphones and her dorm printout, and she was 18 years old and completely prepared, and not prepared at all, which was exactly right. She looked at him. Dad, she said. I know, he said. I wasn't going to. I know. Come here. She hugged him, the real kind, both arms long enough to mean something. He held on for exactly as long as she needed, and then she stepped back and adjusted her bag strap and put her headphones on with the specific efficiency of someone who has decided the next action is forward. Call me when you land, he said. I'm literally flying 2 hours. Call me when you land. Okay. She started toward the entrance, stopped, turned. Dad? Yeah, the thing you said, about doing it anyway when you're not sure it's going to work. Yeah. She held his gaze. I'm going to remember that, she said, for a long time. He nodded. She went inside. He stood at the curb for a moment. The morning was clear and cold, and the airport noise was around him, and his daughter was walking toward her life, and he let himself feel the full weight of it, the pride and the missing her already, and the specific enormous love of a man watching the best thing he'd ever done become its own thing. He felt it completely. And then he got in the truck. He turned left out of the airport. The truck made its sound. He drove home to the house on Birchmore Lane, and he went inside and he made coffee, the terrible, reliable kind, and he sat at the kitchen table in the morning quiet, and he thought about what was next. There was a version 3 to build. There were international licensing conversations Ethan was managing. There was a letter from Patricia Harwick's office about an expansion opportunity he hadn't fully read yet. There was a marigold bed that needed planting before the first frost, because Sophia would be home for Thanksgiving, and she still liked marigolds. There was work. Good work. The kind that mattered. He opened his laptop. He got started. Because that was who Daniel Mercer was. The man who didn't need anyone watching to do the work, who didn't need validation to know the value of what he was building, who had spent 8 years in the quiet, proving that the most important things are built